I become a Mecha. I can evolve infinitely. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 126, Premeditated Murder. Email title: A letter to all project team members. Sender: Albert. Data is corrupted. Time: data is corrupted. Recipient: Maggie. Content: I'm Albert, the project team leader. I believe that many people have heard about the accidental death of Dr. Bennett. I'm formally clarifying to everyone in this email that Dr. Bennett has indeed left us with regret. The reason why we do not allow everyone to discuss this matter during working hours is that the rumored cause of Dr. Bennett's death is inconsistent with the facts. According to the preliminary investigation of the security department, the cause of Dr. Bennett's death was due to his failure to follow the rules and procedures in the experiment, which led to his accidental death due to operational errors, and not because of contact with the experimental subjects as rumored. I believe that everyone working here has fully understood the safety assurance and potential risks of this project. The company can assure you that this accident is just an accidental individual case. The specific explanation notice for this case will be announced within 72 hours. Please rest assured. Another small thing, for the safety of everyone, I hope you will not take off the wristbands issued by the security department tonight easily. The device is only used to monitor the possible operational errors that may occur during work and issue reminders. It has no other function. Finally, the company promises that after the completion of this project, all employees who participated in the project throughout the whole process will be compensated with 5 times the salary and 90 days of annual leave. May the truth protect us. Your Albert lies are endless, and the more you try to cover up, the more obvious it becomes. After reading the email on the screen of the smart terminal, Sato Ziyang stared at the signature at the end with contempt. This is the last letter in the mailing list, which can only mean that the company has not made a reasonable explanation for Dr. Bennett's death after 72 hours. At this time, Daozi patted Sato Ziyang's arm and pointed to the bracelet worn by the woman. A bracelet that prevents employees from making operational errors. You can tell with your toes that this bracelet cannot have only this use. Sato Ziyang carefully took the bracelet from the woman's soft wrist and held it in front of his eyes to observe it repeatedly. As expected, 3 silver circular patterns suddenly appeared on the side of the bracelet that touched the skin. This is Sato. You gently touched the silvering with his fingers wearing combat gloves, only to find that it was not a pattern at all, but a real macro injection port. An extremely terrifying idea emerged in Sato's mind. With a somewhat uneasy mentality, Satoyu took out the folded syringe and drew some dark red blood from the blood vessels on the woman's arm. Unnamed compound, highly toxic, contains some preservative element. Satoyu frowned as he looked at the analysis results on the syringe. It was normal for Satoyu to detect artificial compounds that he had never seen before in the syringe. After all, the Gemini Medical that he and Daozi were investigating was itself a company responsible for developing various compounds. But Satoyu did not expect that this test result would also indirectly confirm his guess: the woman was murdered by Gemini Medical. Let's go, Daozi. Let's go to other rooms. In the next 10 minutes, Sato and Daozi opened 13 more rooms, and the scenes in these rooms were all the same as the first room they entered. If there is any difference, it is that everyone died in different places. Some were lying on the table, some were lying in the quilt, and some fell to the ground halfway through dressing next to the closet. All the dead people were wearing bracelets on their hands, and subtle injection marks could be seen on their wrists. Now Sato knew why the facilities in Area A3 were preserved so well. Gemini Medical did not organize any orderly retreat at all. Perhaps they did have several different emergency plans, but the company chose to wipe out the lives of employees directly. As for why the bodies of employees were preserved with preservatives, it must not be for humanitarian spirit. Only if these bodies still have value would Gemini Medical choose to do so. After searching the 13th room, Sato and Daozi had come to the center of Area A3, where there was a passage leading to other blue rooms in the area. The only blue room they had entered was the power control room. The staff dormitories were all marked green on the map. The security room is marked blue. Let's go there and take a look. After cracking the power system, Sato and Ozzy had already mastered the names of the various areas and rooms, so they also replaced the codes on the holographic map with the original names of the various places. Now they have only the color mystery to solve. The two turned 3 intersections and followed the brightly lit corridor into the east side of the A3 area. After walking for 2 minutes, they found the location of the security room. Unlike other standardized doors, the door of the security room is obviously made of another alloy material. Just from the thickness, it is much thicker than the doors of other rooms. In addition, the security room occupies a larger area on the map than other rooms, so it also uses a double door design like the power control room, but this double door is large enough to drive a small truck in. Dowsy, turn on the mask's filtering effect to the maximum. With the experience of being sprayed in the face by the disinfectant spray last time, Sato learned his lesson. After both of them had assumed a fighting stance and stood to the side of the gate, Sato used the secret key on his wrist to swipe open the electronic lock. Click. With the sound of the metal lock turning, the door of the security room retracted into the thick walls on both sides in less than a second. The thick disinfectant spray once again gushed out of the room, spreading all the way along the open door into the corridor. After the visibility in the room was raised to a normal level, Sato and Ozzy stepped into the door of the security room holding their pistols. This is not a security room, it's simply an arsenal. As soon as the two entered the door, they were shocked by the scene in front of them and almost couldn't walk. The entire room is 2/3 larger than the power control room. From the ceiling to the walls to the floor, it is all covered with dark blue alloy explosion-proof bricks. Rows of weapon racks stand neatly in the room, and each weapon rack is filled with different types of equipment, including pistols, rifles, submachine guns, machine guns, sniper rifles, etc. There were also many weapons hanging on the walls. Sato could tell at a glance that all of them were heavy firepower. In the deepest part of the room, there were 5 power armors parked. Each armor looked intact and connected with colorful plugs. Plop. Just as the two walked to the center of the room, the bodies of the two monsters suddenly fell from their heads and turned into powder. It was not until then that Sato discovered that there was a big hole in the ventilation vent in the security room. Chapter 127 Power Armor. The yellow powder scattered all over the ground made Sato Zayang aim his gun at the hole in the vent instantly. Boom. Sato Zayang listened to his rapidly rising heartbeat, staring at the deep and dark hole without moving. The light source from the bottom of the pistol was like a beam of light swallowed by a black hole, struggling helplessly in a somewhat narrow space. Time passed by minute, and Sato Zayang heard no more sound except for his own and Ozzy's breathing. After confirming again and again that there was no other threat near the hole, Sato Zayang slowly put down his pistol and slowly let his shoulders fall naturally. Looking at the yellow powder on the ground, Sato Zayang can now at least confirm one thing: the blue room represents that there was danger here, but the danger has been eliminated. The reason why he dared to be so sure is that he didn't even feel a trace of airflow from the vent, which proved that the ventilation duct must have been blocked in some way. What exactly is Gemini Medical researching here? Sato Zayang's eyes swept across the rows of dazzling weapon racks and couldn't help but sigh. The amount of munitions here is enough to arm 3 elite teams of 5 to 6 people. MW-12A, a special rifle, provided by Redden's military technology to the Falcon Task Force of Heen State, with a long barrel flash suppressor, assault grip, quadruple/red dot quick switch scope, 30 rounds of ammunition capacity, and a portable telescopic stock, all of which are high-end products. Sato casually opened the dust cover, removed the MW-12A rifle from the weapon rack, pulled out the magazine, and checked the structure of the gun. No one except the Ministry of Defense of Heen should be able to get this level of equipment. It seems that Redden's military technology and Gemini Medical are also on the same boat. I don't know how much cooperation the two companies have carried out behind the scenes. Sato put the rifle on his back and found a magazine filled with bullets in the cabinet under the weapon rack. In his opinion, the entire underground fortification should also be built by Redden's military technology, and Gemini Medical is only responsible for the experimental research part. As for the security personnel, they are probably also from Reden's military technology, otherwise Sato and Aozi would have seen the body of the security personnel here, and they were wearing bracelets. The smart terminal in the security room also verified Sato's idea, because the email system in the terminal is completely different from that of other people. Email title, final action, sender, Jack of Hearts, data corrupted, time, data corrupted recipients. 3 of Hearts, 7 of Hearts, content, the final experimental records of Dr. Albert have been submitted to the headquarters. The operation has achieved the expected results, and is well done. We have just received a notice from Gemini Medical, that they will implement the evacuation plan at 1900 hours tomorrow night. The experiment has entered the final stage, but it is beyond the control of the project team. Some people who know the situation will have accidents. Your final action is to ensure that these people stay here forever. Violent means are allowed, but they must be cleaned up. I wish you a speedy return. Red Jack. Just as I thought, Reden's military technology and Gemini Medical are only in a cooperative relationship. The security personnel only obey orders from the headquarters, and Gemini Medical will not give them orders directly. Sato, you flipped through other emails, and did not find any additional information. The experiment has entered the final stage, but it is beyond the control range, so those who died in the room are the ones who need to have an accident. It seems that the danger we are facing is not small. Sato, you left the smart terminal, and turned to look at Aozi, who was still choosing weapons. Only choose those with great power and a lot of ammunition. We don't have much time. 5 minutes later, 2 dark blue painted power armors walked out of the door of the security room one after another. Although it feels a bit light, it has a really high mobility. Sato, you, who was used to driving a behemoth like Aoji, was not quite used to the size of the power armor for a while. He and Aozi were both driving G2 power armor produced by Reden's military technology. They were about 5 meters high, and made of titanium alloy with low density. Extra explosion-proof armor was also installed on the surface of the body, which looked like a design specifically for monsters. A heavy sniper gun of the Vehicle Killer series was installed on the left shoulder of the body. The gun body and barrel could change their shapes freely on the back and shoulder without affecting the movement of the body. A vertical missile launcher was mounted on the shoulder on the other side. The launcher had 3 launch ports and could be rotated to the magazine at the rear of the body through the bracket to refill ammunition after the missile was empty. A detachable backpack was installed on the back of the power armor. A giant armor-piercing rifle could be hung on the outside of the backpack at ordinary times. The backpack itself could also be transformed into jet mode to help the body move at high speed during combat. In general, compared with the giant mechas that were tens of meters high, the top equipment of these ground forces was not inferior in terms of configuration. However, for Sato and Aozi, the biggest difference in driving power armor is that there is no need to establish neural synchronization. All the actions of these small guys must be manually operated by the driver. The good news is that Sato found that the controllers of these power armors are just like large game controllers, and he and Aozi often play games together in the apartment when they are free. So the two quickly got the hang of the power armor and figured out all the basic operations. After sitting in the power armor, the two felt that the space in the corridor was a lot more cramped, but as long as they didn't make big movements, the space here could still accommodate the basic activities of the 2 power armors. It's just that most of the rooms can't pass through the door. If you want to drive the power armor in, you can only tear down the wall. Driving this thing is much faster than walking. It took Sato and Aozi only 5 minutes to return to the large lifting platform, which originally took 15 minutes to complete. Boom. The 2 power armors stepped on the floor of the lifting platform, making a lot of noise. Set target area, B2. Since Sato took over the system here with the highest authority, he no longer needs to do everything by himself. He only needs voice control for any instructions. For example, now he does not need to leave the cockpit to press the elevator himself. Command received. The lift platform has been activated. If you are in danger, please press the red button on the wall. If we are in danger, no one will come to save us. It is better to use the rifle on the power armor to shoot the target directly. The cold steel wrapped around Sato's body gave him a reliable sense of security. Sure enough, all fear comes from insufficient firepower. Chapter 128, Bones. When Sato and Ozzy were about to reach the B2 area, they realized why the lift platform could not continue to sink. The entire lift passage from the B2 area below was filled with phenolic resin. I thought the elevator could not go down only due to the emergency agreement restrictions. With the highest authority, it could be unimpeded. Now it seems that Gemini Medical and Redden's military technology have already made relevant plans and blocked the road. More importantly, there is only such a lift platform throughout the entire underground fortification that runs through all areas. According to the design on the map, the artificial passage in the B2 area has only built the part that goes down. If the area below B2 wants to return to B1 or Area A, there is no other way except taking the lift platform. This is a completely unreasonable behavior from a design point of view. But when Sato thought of everything that happened in the A3 area, this seemingly unreasonable design suddenly became logical. This way of killing and silencing is obviously much more efficient than giving each employee a bracelet. The platform has arrived at area B2. As the system prompt sounded, the two power armors also walked out of the lifting platform with heavy steps and came to the area connecting the upper and lower floors. Unlike the A3 area where the door opened to the corridor, the two people just got off the lifting platform and found that there was a large explosion-proof door in front of them that needed to be opened with biometric authentication, and there were 3 full-angle cameras on the top of the explosion-proof door. There is no doubt that this is a buffer zone used to isolate the B2 area and the lifting platform. Buffer zone is also in line with the style of these two companies. Sato was no longer surprised by this, and he could easily bypass the biometric authentication with the highest authority. But another question immediately appeared in his mind. How did Naomiko and the others open the explosion-proof door? Sato directly checked the status of the biometric authenticator in the system interface and found that it was still running with very low power. But this doesn't mean anything. Unless there are project team employees among Naomiko and her group, this explosion-proof door will never be opened for them. At this moment, Sato suddenly noticed that the 3 cameras on the explosion-proof door seemed to be in operation. An ominous premonition rose in Sato's heart. Open the buffer gate of Area B2. Command received. Warning. According to the emergency agreement, the buffer gate is one of the important lines of defense. It must be opened with the authorization of Redden's military technology. Do you want to continue opening it? Continue opening. Sato held the authorization key from Redden's in his hand. The buffer gate is opening. Click. The rotating warning light kept flashing above the gate, and the sound of heavy chains turning slowly rang in the ears of the two people. The gate with a yellow warning sign slowly opened from the middle, revealing the original appearance of Area B2. For a moment, Sato and Ozzy were both shocked by the scene in front of them, and even their heartbeats slowed down. It was a pile of bones. The dried blood was like scarlet paint all over the corridor, and it looked extremely bright and dazzling under the searchlight of the power armor. Sato was silent for a long time and couldn't say a word. He couldn't imagine what kind of despair these victims who had turned into bones had experienced. And Sato couldn't even recognize the identities of these people through the scanner on the power armor. Just a door explosion-proof door cut off the last ray of life for these people and became the dividing line between life and death. Let's go. When Sato said these 2 words, his mood could no longer be described in words. 2 tall power armors stepped on the fragile bones and crushed them into powder with a crisp sound. If you want to drive the power armor through here, you can only do this. At the same time, Sato and Ozzy also controlled the body to pull out the giant armor-piercing rifle hanging on the detachable backpack, ready to deal with possible threats at any time. Out of caution, Sato did not control the system to turn on the lighting facilities in Area B2. First, because the bones they saw could not be piled up at the door for no reason. There must be a threat in Area B2 that these people could not resist, and turning on the lighting facilities might disturb them. Second, the searchlight on the power armor is enough to support the 2 people in the dark environment in terms of lighting range and light intensity. Dong dong. Dong dong. As their huge footsteps echoed in the corridor, the 2 power armors walked all the way to the first fork in the road in Area B2. Along the way, Satoyu had seen at least 4 rooms with collapsed walls, and these rooms were marked in black on the map. Authority sharing successful. Bean. Let's act separately. I have shared the highest authority with you. The preset power control group is also in the data packet I sent you, and the names of the corresponding facilities are marked separately. Satoyu spoke, while keeping an eye on the surroundings. You turn on the screen sharing, so that I can see any situation on your side at any time. Remember, finding Naomiko and her group is our primary goal, and everything else can be put aside for now. Since the head of the G2 power armor has no neck, and can only rotate horizontally, Bean cannot control the body to complete the nod action, so he can only give a thumbs up to indicate that he has received Satoyu's order. Although Satoyu didn't want Daozi to act alone, considering the space limitation of the corridor, even if the 2 power armors walked together, only the one in front could be responsible for fighting. The power armor walking behind could not only find a gap to shoot, but also interfere with the range of movement of the armor in front. In addition, the 2 of them had little time left. If only Kobayashiju was the only one to feed the elderly every 4 hours, it would definitely not be completed on time. So Satoyu had to make up his mind and let himself and Daozi explore separately to pursue the highest efficiency. Action. With Satoyu's order, the 2 burly power armors walked towards different corridors with rifles raised. According to the part shown on the map, the size of the B2 area is almost the same as that of A3, so Satoyu estimated that the search time for the 2 would not exceed 15 minutes. What's more, the area that Satoyu and Daozi actually had to search was only smaller than that shown on the map, because the rooms in the B2 area were also in a power off state, and there was no need to break the doors of those locked rooms to search. The 2 only needed to focus on the corridors and some of the destroyed rooms. However, after 10 minutes, Sato still did not find any traces of Naomiko and her group, and Daozi did not find any clues either. Moreover, the 2 were about to complete their search of the entire area. This made Sato think of the worst possible outcome. Naomiko and her group might have gone to a deeper floor. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 129 Immortal. Compared with the various staff dormitories in the A3 area, the facilities and room planning in the B2 area are obviously more compact. Whether it is the name marked on the map or the picture that Satoyu saw with his own eyes, it confirms the fact that B2 belongs to the work area. The rooms here are much larger than the staff dormitories in terms of floor space, and the rooms are divided into more than a dozen equal parts of desks. Each workstation is separated by sound-absorbing baffles on all 4 sides, which looks both cramped and luxurious. However, Satoyu did not expect that most of the office facilities in the B2 area are actually the same as most companies. In addition to basic office sets and smart terminals, there are no high-tech equipment that Satoyu has not seen. Seeing this scene in a military facility really surprised Satoyu. Unknown energy activity detected. Just when Satoyu only had 2 rooms left to search, a red warning window suddenly popped up inside the power armor and automatically marked the location of the energy activity on the panoramic display. Satoyu, who received the system alarm, immediately stopped his feet stranded in the air and adjusted the radio device to maximum power. Snap, snap. It was not until then that Satoyu could hear the faint sound coming from the room at the end of the corridor. It was like someone was constantly hitting the meat with a stick. I found something that might be a monster here. You should be careful there too. Even though Satoyu hadn't seen what was making the noise, he immediately used voice communication to tell Daozi, who was at the other end of area B2. After confirming that Daozi had received the message, Satoyu controlled the power armor and carefully put his feet that were suspended in the air on the ground and tried to lower the sound made by the armor when walking and approach the target location little by little. The place he was going to now was a conference room. In terms of space size alone, this conference room was more than twice as large as those offices that were organized by groups. There were only 10 conference rooms like this in Area B2, but the one Satoru was going to now was marked as black on the map. From the only information currently available, all the red rooms that Satoru had seen were locked, but the black rooms had been damaged in various ways. Sato could tell that there must be some danger in the B2 area. According to his idea, red might mean that there is danger in the room, but the danger is locked in the room. The black room is obviously a destroyed room, and the destroyer is likely to be the danger escaping from the room. Judging from the number of bones at the gate of the B2 area, the dangers that once existed here must be no less than 2 digits in number, or they must be very powerful, otherwise it would be impossible to slaughter so many people. However, apart from the unknown energy activity that Sato was approaching, he and Aozi did not find any other suspicious threats in the corridor. The two have almost completed 90% of the search for the B2 area. Thinking of this, Sato couldn't help but tighten the joystick in his hand, turned off the strong light searchlight on the whole body of the power armor, and activated the night vision module. The panoramic display screen was instantly covered with green. It took Sato, who was driving the power armor, a full half minute to walk only 20 meters. At this moment, he could already hear the click sound that echoed throughout the room. After taking a deep breath, Sato's eyes immediately became sharp. Come on. The tall power armor pressed its back against the wall outside the conference room and slowly revealed its dark blue side, looking through the collapsed wall into the conference room, where the strange noises were coming from. Snap, snap. A dozen strange creatures that could be called meatballs gathered together, slowly tearing the bodies still wearing clothes on the ground. They were covered with greasy pieces of meat, and the surface of the meat was covered with pink pimples of human skin. Dozens of arms and calves stretched out from the surface of these deformed creatures, drooping weakly in the air, like drowning people who had given up struggling. On Sato's screen, the surface of these meatballs was covered with human faces with their eyeballs and nose bones dug out. The expression of each face was like a patient who had suffered a mental breakdown after being tortured, full of unspeakable distortion and pain. The corpse, still wearing clothes, was dragged by those pale arms and stuffed into the mouth of the human face on the surface of the meatball. When one mouth was full, another mouth was filled. The disgusting snapping sound was the sound of these meatballs slowly shaking and rolling on the ground, crushing the flesh and blood. After seeing this horrifying scene, Sato's Ayang seemed to be able to smell the stench in the air through the thick titanium alloy armor plate. The reason why he didn't see other living things in the corridor was because these deformed things all gathered together and shared the body of a poor man. A strong rage gathered in Sato's Ayang's chest. He turned on all the searchlights on the power armor without hesitation and shone the dazzling light on these creatures. Almost at the moment when Sato's Ayang turned on the searchlight, he also felt countless gazes that made his back cold, even if the faces on these meatballs had no eyeballs at all. Gurgle, gurgle. The meatballs that were discovered seemed to want to roar, but for some reason, the human faces on the surface of the meatballs could not make any sound, but instead vomited out the meat paste in their mouths. Bang, bang, bang. Facing these disgusting creatures that feed on humans, Satoru didn't want to say a word and directly controlled the power armor with his fingers tightly holding the trigger. One by one, the cold bullets were pushed into the hot barrel, and before the burst shells fell to the ground, they penetrated the uneven body of the meatballs, bringing out a string of dark red blood. The continuous burst of muzzle flames even overshadowed the searchlights of the body itself, illuminating the tall figure of the power armor on the broken wall. When the last shell fell to the floor with white smoke, the entire conference room seemed to be dyed red by a river of blood. Satoru emptied the first drum of the heavy armor-piercing rifle in less than 10 seconds. But what Satoru didn't expect was that even though these exploded meatballs had been broken into pieces of meat all over the floor, they still maintained an activity that shouldn't exist. Unknown energy activity detected. Unknown energy activity detected. Unknown energy activity detected. For a moment, the energy radar in front of Satoru was filled with countless tiny dots of light, constantly stimulating his retina like a galaxy filled with stars. Snap, snap. That was the sound of countless pieces of meat squirming on the floor. Chapter 130, Speed. Damn, what are these things? Looking at the squirming flesh and blood on the ground and the shining spots on the radar, Satoru only felt his scalp tingling. Moreover, the movement speed of these flesh and blood is not slow. They are like magnets that attract each other and quickly gather in the same direction. According to this situation, those disgusting meatballs will be reborn again in a minute. At this time, Satoyu has replaced the heavy armor-piercing rifle with a new drum, and without hesitation, he fired 2 shots at one of the larger pieces of flesh and blood. Bang bang. Because the caliber of the bullet itself is very large, the flesh and blood, that is only the size of a fist, turned into a pool of mud on the spot. Satoyu stared nervously at the blood flower that he had just shot through, ready to shoot again at the same position at any time. As a veteran pilot with rich combat experience, Satoyu has killed many monsters in the world. From the initial level 1 monster to the current level 4 monster, he has seen many with his own eyes. There are many monsters with strong self-repair ability, but in Sato's impression, those monsters can only be described as tenacious vitality at best. Once the mecha breaks the weakness, or is blown into pieces by artillery fire, these monsters will never survive. This is the first time that Sato has seen a deformed creature that can still remain active after being broken into pieces. Gilu, gurgle. In Sato's sight, the mud that seemed to be irreparable suddenly emitted a string of tiny bubbles, like the gas released by some ongoing chemical reaction. However, just when Sato was surprised and wanted to pull the trigger, the bubbles on the surface of the mud suddenly exploded, and the mud itself completely returned to calm. It seems that it is not a real immortal creature. It can't repair itself after suffering damage beyond the limit. Although this news sounds exciting, it is a mixed blessing in Sato's eyes. This means that, if you want to completely kill these meatballs, you must spend more money to crush them to the point where they cannot be repaired. Even if Satoyu used up all the bullets in the power armor, he couldn't kill all the dozen meatballs. But he had a way to save more ammunition. Puff. Satoyu suppressed his inner discomfort, controlled the power armor, and rushed directly into the conference room, constantly smashing the rotten meat attached to the wall and the floor with his feet and the butt of the gun. Every time the power armor crushed the meat into mud, Satoyu's ears would ring with the disgusting sound that made him feel physically uncomfortable. Warning, the foot armor is under attack. What? Hearing the system prompt, Satoyu immediately controlled the power armor to raise the dark red souls. The flesh and blood that could not be completely broken was sticking to the outer shell of the power armor, and they kept gnawing at the metal that was strong enough to withstand the impact of bullets with their sharp teeth under their skin. It was not until then that Satoyu realized that he was not fighting against a dozen meatballs at all, but thousands of independent lives that made up the meatballs. Realizing the danger, Satoyu immediately turned around and left the conference room. Then, he pulled out the tactical dagger hidden in the waist of the power armor and scraped off all the wriggling pieces of flesh attached to the surface of the body. It's endless. After finally cleaning off the remaining pieces of flesh on the body, Satoyu found that the dagger was also covered with this disgusting stuff, so he simply pressed the button on the handle and threw the replaceable blade on the ground. At the same time, the meatballs in the conference room were basically reassembled, but their appearance looked more terrifying than before. The surface that should have been covered by a human face has completely turned into a piece of twisted broken skin. Except for the 2 holes for the eyes and the mouth itself, it is completely unrecognizable that it is a face that a person would have. As for the original arms and calves, they were also combined into one after the reorganization, turning into a strange limb, just like a swollen foot with several flexible fingers that only hands have. Bang bang bang. Just as Satoyu was hesitating whether to fire another round of shots, another gunshot suddenly rang out on his screen. It was the sound of Dowsy, who was at the other end of the B2 area, exchanging fire with the meatballs. Dowsy, the plan has changed. These things are hard to kill. Even if they are mincemeat, you still have to finish them off. Don't waste ammunition. Seeing that Dowsy had encountered the same fate as himself, Satoyu immediately made a decision. Return to the lift platform at full speed now. We will meet there, and then return to Area A together. As early as when Satoyu gave Dowsy the order, he had already controlled the power armor to run back along the way they came. He thought that those bloated meatballs had no chance of catching up with the power armor that was striding forward, but he was wrong. A dozen bloody meatballs were like high-speed rotating tires, running rampant in the corridor, biting tightly about 5 meters behind Satoyu. And the entire distance was still being shortened. Wherever the meatballs had run over, there were pieces of meat that had not yet completely stuck together, and dark red blood stains scattered everywhere. On the other side, Daozi, who was retreating at full speed, encountered a situation even worse than Sato's ion. Since her gunshots could be heard in almost the entire corridor, they disturbed the meatballs that were originally trapped in the red room. They quickly broke out of the door and blocked Daozi's way back. Daozi, don't be sandwiched by them. Take a detour from the left. Sato Zion could clearly see the situation on Daozi's side from the screen sharing. He knew very well that if Daozi fired, the power armor would have to slow down. Once it slowed down, it would definitely be caught up by the meatballs behind before reaching its destination. If it weren't for the fact that these disgusting creatures could remain active even after breaking apart, he and Daozi wouldn't have to flee so embarrassingly without fighting. After hearing Sato's command, Daozi chose to believe him without hesitation. The power armor controlled by Daozi braked suddenly in front of the fork in the road, creating a dazzling firework on the floor and turning at the fastest speed. Even so, in Daozi's radar display, the meatballs behind her were not thrown away, but instead shortened the relative distance with her. Unknown energy activity detected. The sudden system prompt sound directly made Sato's heart sink to the bottom. If no new enemy was found, the system would not issue a prompt. Boom, boom, boom. At the end of Sato's sight, a door was slapped with dozens of raised handprints in just a few seconds. After a loud bang, 5 more meatballs blocked his way, and these 5 meatballs appeared at the meeting point where the 2 were about to arrive, which was in front of the pile of bones in the buffer zone. No, if this goes on. Sato wanted to raise his rifle to shoot through those meatballs, but once he did so, the meatballs less than 3 meters behind him would catch up with him. At the critical moment, Satoyu glanced at the map in the upper right corner of the screen. There was only one route that was not blocked in both directions. Turn left at the next intersection and enter corridor number 3. As Satoyu spoke, he also changed direction at the intersection and headed towards the new target location. Let's go downstairs and go to B3. Chapter 131 Falling into the Abyss. Almost at the moment of turning into the fork in the road, Satoyu suddenly controlled the armor to turn around, and before he completely stopped, by sliding with the inertia of his feet, he aimed the dark muzzle at the meatball that hit the corner wall. Boom boom boom. The thick fingers of the power armor pulled the trigger without any emotion, and quickly pushed the huge bullets in the drum into the gun chamber, and poured them all on the swollen meatball. The dense rain of bullets penetrated the bodies of several meatballs in succession, until the bullets were completely dyed from gold to red, and finally stopped in the hole in the wall. Insufficient bullets, please replace the drum. Satoyu ignored the reminder issued by the system and directly controlled the heavy sniper rifle on the left shoulder of the power armor. A yellow aiming circle suddenly appeared on Satoyu's panoramic display, and he quickly adjusted the posture of the body and aimed the aiming circle at the meatballs that came later. Dynamic calibration mode has been activated. Parameters are being calculated. Calculate shit. Fire. Satoyu had no time to wait for the system to calculate the parameters one by one, so he switched the sniper rifle to manual control mode on the spot and pressed the firing button hard. Bang! A blue light streaked across the narrow corridor like a comet trail, and the terrifying kinetic energy bursting out of the barrel even made the power armor that failed to stand firm in time slide back 5 meters in an instant. The spiral bullet penetrated the bodies of the meatballs like a drill, mincing all their fragile flesh and blood, and shattered into a pool of meat mud in the air, splashing all over the corridor. On the other side, Daozi also tacitly copied Satoyu's method and used the same method to output a round of firepower to the meatballs behind her when she pulled into the next corner, but the power armor she controlled was obviously much smoother than Satoyu in terms of movement. Because of this, Daozi entered the number 3 corridor earlier than Satoyu, and Satoyu naturally took on the responsibility of guarding the rear. Perhaps because the corridor was narrower, it took these shattered meatballs less than 20 seconds to reassemble their new bodies. Before they regained their new lives, The meatballs that escaped from the red room ran over their bodies and rushed into corridor number 3 at high speed. "Just keep going forward, don't look back," Satoyu shouted into the communicator while manipulating the power armor to replace the third drum of the heavy armor piercing rifle. But the reloading also slowed down Satoyu's forward speed. According to Satoyu's prediction, he and Ozzy could reach the downward entrance before the meatballs caught up with them. Corridor number 3 is the only passage in the entire B2 area without rooms. Although this does not mean that the corridor will not connect to other forks with walls on both sides, Satoyu at least does not have to worry about being knocked down by the meatballs that broke out of the room while running. If you look at the map, you can find that this corridor is also the center line of the B2 area. It not only connects the lifting platform to the downward entrance in the shortest straight line, but also serves as a hub connecting the main roads and branches of each corridor. Puff. Just when Satoyu thought that the two could escape, the meatball behind them suddenly broke without any damage. What are they doing? Although Satoyu couldn't turn the upper body of the power armor 180 degrees, the head of the power armor itself has a rear view module, so he can also see what is happening behind him. The next second, Satoyu knew the reason why these meatballs broke. Although these meatballs have no long-range attack methods, they have voluntarily given up part of their flesh and blood and turned into smaller meatballs to increase their rolling speed. What's worse is that, because the size of these meatballs has become smaller, their movements are no longer restrained by each other. The corridor that could only accommodate one meatball has become much more spacious for them. Now there are 3 meatballs moving forward in unison and approaching Satoyu's back. Sato's plan was completely disrupted. According to the current speed of both parties, in just 10 seconds, Sato would be caught up by the meatball behind him. He now had to consider whether he should turn around and output firepower again. Damn it. After hesitating for only a second, Sato once again controlled the power armor to turn around and poured bullets at the rolling meatballs behind him. This was the only way he could think of at the moment. However, just when the bullet hit the meatball in the middle of the queue, something unexpected happened. The meatball pierced by the bullet did not break into a pool of meat mud like before. To be precise, only a part of it was beaten into blood, and more flesh and blood that were not directly hit by the bullet split into more than a dozen small meatballs and came towards Sato, who was almost stopping at an even more exaggerated speed. At this time, Dowsy, who was also staring at the rear view screen, turned around, but the power armor could not change its size at will like the meatball. Even if she wanted to fire to support Sato, the bullet would inevitably penetrate Sato's body first. Seeing that the rolling meatball was about to hit his face, Satoyu could only take the most extreme method to deal with it. The missile launcher has been switched to manual control mode. At the same time, the missile launcher on the right shoulder of the power armor has also risen to the predetermined launch position, and all 3 launch holes are on standby. Fire. Boom. The blazing flames instantly filled half of the corridor. Under the impact of the violent explosion, the solid ceiling and the walls standing on both sides of the corridor began to collapse. Countless steel bars and rubble flew everywhere in the rising flames, and the floor under Satoyu and Alza's feet also had several cracks in the shaking, as if it would fall apart in the next second, causing the two to fall into the dark abyss. Run. Even through several layers of thick alloy, Satoyu could feel the scalding heat. The 2 power armors no longer cared about whether the meatball behind them was dead or alive. They could only run to the end of the corridor. Even if the power armor could keep them alive in the high temperature, the crumbling B2 area was enough to bury them completely. Boom, boom, boom. Countless debris hit the outer shell of the power armor, making a sound like raindrops hitting steel plates. But just when the downward passage appeared in the 2 people's field of vision, Satoyu found that the place where the elevator should have been was empty. There was only a bottomless hole and a cable that seemed to be used as a backup option. Fuck. Satoyu could no longer bear the anger in his chest. He felt that all this was just a deadly joke played by fate on him. But he and Ozzy had no choice. Jump. With Satoyu's order, the 2 tall power armors jumped one after another and grabbed the cable that looked not very solid. The next moment, the 2 of them slid rapidly into the dark underground. Chapter 132 Under the Abyss. 10 meters, 50 meters, 100 meters. The explosion and the collapse sounded like a speeding train, and were replaced by the metal friction sound of the power armor's palm and the cable, and the sparks that burst into the armor's visual module. The two power armors fell infinitely into the bottomless passage like two extremely heavy meteorites. B3, C1, C2. The orange-yellow paint symbolizing the area code stayed on Sato's retina for less than half a second, and then it flashed by like a picture fast-forwarded 10 times. The white searchlight kept shaking between the rocks and alloys, and the symphony of civilization and nature was so clearly defined yet blended. At this time, Sato already knew the fate of Naomiko and her group, and the body torn by the meatball was the best proof. He only had one thought in his mind now, that was to pray that he would not be smashed into a meat paste together with the power armor before landing. Finally, after a vague O4 flashed in Sato's eyes, a long-lost system prompt appeared on his panoramic display. Warning, the body is detected to be about to meet the impact at an overspeed state, and the jetpack has been automatically turned on. Boom. Almost at the moment when the red system warning popped up, two hot flames burst out from the jet nozzle on the back of the power armor, giving the armor, that was still falling, a reaction force with maximum power. Sato, who was sitting in the cockpit, obviously felt a strong pressure, and then found that the speed of the body's fall had slowed down. 100 meters, 50 meters, 10 meters. Just a few seconds later, a rapidly enlarged piece of metal wreckage appeared on the panoramic display in front of Sato. It was a crashed lifting platform. Warning, collision is coming. Bang. Amid the deafening sound of the collision, the two power armor smashed directly into the wreckage of the lifting platform. For a moment, countless metal fragments flew out from the dust spreading outward, and fell into the darkness where one could not see one's hand in front of one's face. Warning, 17% of the full body armor is damaged. Damn it. Sato Zion felt that his whole body was numb, as if he was struck by lightning, and the tinnitus that had not yet completely dissipated almost made him vomit his internal organs on the controller. It was also an emergency landing, but Dowsy and another power armor did not react so much. Although she also felt a little dizzy, it was only a matter of a moment. After lying on the controller for more than 10 seconds, Sato Zion resisted the headache that made him want to use a knife to cut open his head and spoke again. Those damn things didn't catch up, right? However, as soon as Sato Zion finished speaking, his system once again issued a warning of falling objects from high altitude. Sato Zion, who was still in a dizzy state, immediately moved away from the center of the passage with Dowsy and retreated to a safe distance. Plop, plop. Dozens of small meatballs fell like hail on the place where the two had stood before, but due to the high vertical drop, these meatballs turned into a pool of blood the moment they landed, and there was no possibility of self-repair. These beasts can grow anything, but not their brains. Listening to the crackling sound in his ears, Sato really couldn't understand why these creatures would do such a stupid thing. Don't they have the instinct to survive? The blood rain lasted for half a minute before it stopped. The ruins of the lift platform, which should have been black, were completely stained with dark red blood, looking like a scene from a horror movie. However, these long 30 seconds also allowed Satoru to completely recover. He reopened the holographic map to confirm where he and Dowsy were now. According to Satoru's idea, since the two had fallen to the bottom, they must have arrived at Area D. If the entire underground fortification was built with a simple vertical structure, then he and Dowsy must be at the entrance of Area D3. Rather than looking at the map to confirm their current location, it is better to say that it is to find a way to safely pass through Area D3. After all, in Satoru's impression, the entire color tone of Area D is basically black with red, and D3 can't even see a little red, it is completely covered in black. The danger can be imagined. Beep, beep, beep. Time passed by minute, and the scanning sound from the energy radar played regularly like a timer. Dowsy waited quietly for Satakshan to speak, but after a long time, she did not wait for this decisive man to say a word. It was not that Satakshan did not want to speak, nor did he suddenly become indecisive, but he encountered a problem that he had never expected. He read the holographic map over and over again, and even turned the source file upside down with the highest authority, but he still could not find the location of himself and Dowsy in the D3 area. On the contrary, Two flashing green dots representing Satakshin and Dowsy appeared below the D3 area. In other words, the two were currently outside the map boundary on the holographic map. How is this possible? Satakshin had already started the system self-check for the 4th time, but the detection result of the map module was still normal. It was not until then that Satakshin's mind flashed the scene he saw when he fell before. It was a bright yellow logo, but for some reason, the bright color was about to fade away like an unearthed cultural relic. D4. He remembered that this was a number and a number that did not exist on the map. If this area really existed, then it would not be a system error for him and Dowsy to appear outside the map boundary. What is this? A hidden reward? Satoyu, who had come to his senses, laughed at himself helplessly. Since it was a fact that the two of them were in D4, no matter how much he complained, he could not change the status quo. It seems that the map we got is not complete. This is the real core part of the entire project. Query the power supply group in the D4 area and list all the subdivision options. Satoyu gave the system an order without hesitation. This was also the only card he held in his hand. The command has been received. The system is querying. The query is over. No power supply options for D4 area were found. Please check the keywords in your command. Is even the power supply of D4 area independent? No, this is too exaggerated. If you want to support the power supply of an entire area, the most cost-effective option is definitely not to build a separate hidden power generation device. Although Satoyu said this, when he thought of what Gemini Medical and Redden's military technology had done, he suddenly felt that there was nothing they couldn't do. But even if they really did this, the D4 area still fell into pitch black darkness, which only proved that the power system here also collapsed in the accident. Wait. Just as Satoyu was about to pull beam deeper, he suddenly heard something in his ear. It's the sound of airflow. Chapter 133 Weird Overlap. The sound of airflow means there must be an exit to the surface here. Satoyu, who had felt somewhat desperate, suddenly felt that he had grasped a glimmer of hope. However, the sound of airflow was very weak, which could only be 3 situations. First, the entrance and exit of the D4 area connecting to the outside world may be very small, so the sound of airflow is extremely weak. Second, the spatial scale of the D4 area is beyond imagination, and the entrance and exit are located deep in the area, so the sound of airflow is very weak. Third, the first and second situations occur at the same time, but the probability is very small, otherwise Satoyu basically will not sense the airflow. But in any case, Satoyu and Dowsy must first go to the depths of this unknown area to witness the so-called exit to the surface with their own eyes. Let's go, Dowsy, we still have a chance to survive. Satoyu took a deep breath and then reluctantly turned his back, leaving the dark red lifting platform completely behind. It was not until this moment that Satoyu realized how special the D4 area he and Dowsy were in was. The white searchlight did not hit any metal facilities as Satoyu expected. On the contrary, the cone-shaped light was like a light shooting into the boundless universe, destined to dissipate in the vast darkness and be swallowed up mercilessly. How can it be so wide? For a moment, Satoyu had the illusion that he had returned to the Blackhorn underground industrial base. Unwilling to give up, Satoyu drove the power armor around to search and barely figured out the basic structure of the D4 area. The vertical height of this space is at least more than 200 meters, and there are no artificial creations in the place where the light shines, all of which are brown rocks that he and Dowsy don't recognize. How can there be such a large natural cavity under Wuju Mountain? Satoyu couldn't believe that such a large place was not artificially excavated. But this is not what Satoyu wants to think about now, so he quickly threw this question out of his mind and led Dowsy carefully to the depths of the D4 area. The two were both anxious and cautious. They wanted to speed up and run in the direction of the airflow, but when they thought of the dangers here, they had to slow down and observe the surrounding environment while moving forward. Beep, beep, beep. As the two power armors went deeper and deeper, their heavy steps formed a rhythmic coordination with the regular scanning sound of the energy radar, becoming a harmonizer to stabilize the emotions of the two. The rock structure here is really strange. The more Satoyu observed the surrounding environment, the more he felt as if he was in a natural miracle. The brown rocks here are angular and look no different from the various geometric bodies made by humans. Moreover, the place where Sato's Ayang and Daozi are standing now looks like an arched artificial passage without a roof. Its structure is not much different from what the two had seen in the A3 and B2 areas before. However, it is this characteristic that is very similar to human buildings that makes Sato's Ayang feel creepy. 150 meters. Satoyu silently recorded the distance they had walked since the crash site. Since the space in the D4 area was much larger than other areas, coupled with the two disadvantages of no map and low visibility, Satoyu had to be prepared to run back to the crash site at any time. Daozi, who was sitting in another power armor, was not idle either. While she was on the alert with her big blue eyes, she kept using the visual information collected by the two armors to draw a holographic map. As of now, the two of them have a 70% complete holographic map in their hands. Of course, it is limited to the D4 area that the two have explored so far. Daozi, do you feel that the sound of the airflow has become louder? When they walk to a distance of about 200 meters, the sound of the airflow in Satoyu's ears had almost reached the normal breeze level, and the air resistance calculation module of the power armor also started to work. Hearing Satoyu's question, Daozi immediately gave a thumbs up to show his approval. To be able to generate this level of wind, the size of the cave entrance must be large. Satoyu can now finally be sure that the entrance to the surface can definitely fit two power armors. Unknown energy activity detected. Before Sato and Daozi could even celebrate in their hearts, the cold and mechanical system prompt sound made them nervous again. Just when Sato focused his eyes on the energy radar, he suddenly found that the red light spot symbolizing the enemy had overlapped with the green light spots of the two. Where? The feeling of uneasiness rose from Sato's heart like a tide. He controlled the power armor and tightened the heavy armor-piercing rifle in his hand, shaking the light source on his body quickly, trying to find the risks hidden in the darkness. But even if the two power armor searched their respective directions back to back, they couldn't find any active creatures. Impossible. It's obviously close to us. Looking at the flashing red dot in the energy radar, Sato's heartbeat became faster and faster. Whether it was the plain area or the space above the head, the two had searched it all, without any omissions. But the sense of crisis that seemed to be real was like a part of the air, almost forcing Sato to breathe. After hesitating for a second, Sato made a bold decision. Run in the direction of the airflow. The logic behind his thinking was simple. If this dangerous thing is nearby, but hidden in an invisible place, then the best way to avoid being attacked is to keep moving. With Sato's Ayang's order, the two power armors immediately began to run wildly in the direction of the airflow. Sure enough, just as Sato's Ayang expected, the red dot on the energy radar stayed in place for a second, and then it bit them tightly behind at a speed comparable to the two people. The strange thing is that Sato's Ayang still couldn't see anything from the rear view module of the panoramic display. Damn, is it an invisible guy? Although Sato's Ayang had never encountered a monster that could disappear directly from the vision of humans or cameras, he couldn't think of any other reasonable explanation. The next second, Sato's Ayang found that his idea was wrong. With the current moving speed of the two power armors, the airflow they created when running can be completely captured by the air resistance calculation module. That is to say, even if the thing chasing behind the two people can hide its body, it cannot escape the induction of the air resistance calculation module. But the truth was like a bucket of ice water poured on Sato's face, because there were only 3 detectable targets on his screen: himself, Daozi, and the air current that the two were chasing. An inexplicable fear crept up on Sato's ears. They were racing against a non-existent danger. Chapter 134 Bloody Vision. Oops. Sato and Daozi ran for less than 10 seconds in total, and the red dot in the energy radar that was chasing them began to speed up, and soon overlapped with the two moving green dots again. The next second, Sato and Daozi finally knew where the enemy came from. Bang! The brown rock platform under the feet of the two suddenly exploded, and more than a dozen human arms covered with transparent mucus immediately grabbed the soles and calves of the two power armors. Get out of my way. Sato drove at full speed and controlled the power armor to forcibly tear off these arms that hindered his movement. With a few sounds like tearing cloth, These newly grown arms were easily torn off by the ruthless steel warriors like the tentacles of a small octopus, and only those palms that were tightly holding the armor plate with their fingers still relied on the legs of the power armor. Even though the whole scene was extremely disgusting, the two had no time to care about the broken limbs and arms hanging on the armor. But these arms kept coming out of the rocks under their feet like weeds, and they kept trying to tear them apart. Boom, boom, boom. At this time, Sato and Ozzy were already at the point where they could not move an inch. They could only control the power armor and raise the heavy armor-piercing rifles in their hands and ruthlessly shoot at the ground that looked like a living thing. It was not until the flying bullets beat the clusters of arms into a bloody mess that Sato could barely see what the rocks under his feet were. These substances that looked like brown rocks were clearly hardened flesh and blood skin. They tightly wrapped all them and made buildings in the D4 area like dry shells. The materials that should have emitted a silver metallic light also became dull and lusterless under the corrosion of these flesh and blood, as fragile as dried animal bones. This is what the D4 area originally looked like, a world completely covered and eroded by flesh and blood. After realizing that what he was stepping on was a terrifying creature that had devoured all the buildings in the entire area, Sato's eyelids began to twitch uncontrollably. Even if every bullet fired by the power armor can turn the target into mud, these endless pale arms can still keep coming back. At this moment, Sato suddenly felt that he was fighting against a sea. No matter how he pulled the trigger, he could not stop himself from being swallowed by the sea. Fuck. Countless dark red plasma sprayed wantonly in the empty space. The feet of the two power armors were already full of cold shells. Their bodies were also dyed from dark blue to dark red, and the wreckage hanging on the legs of the armor was piled up into 4 disgusting mountains of meat. Warning, barrel overheating detected. Please stop shooting immediately. After the rifle and Sato's hand stopped drawing, there was only one drum left in his magazine. It happened to be at this time. Sato gritted his teeth and controlled the power armor to throw the empty drum under the rifle to a cluster of newly grown arms. Sato knew that the counterattack he and Ozzy were doing now was futile, but he was not pouring firepower here just to live a few more seconds. He was also using this short time to think about how the two of them could escape. Use the jetpack. Almost at the moment when Sato roared at the communicator, dazzling beams of light burst out from the jet ports on the back of the two power armors at the same time. With the powerful power of fuel boost, the legs of the two armors were finally able to break away from the meat mountain. Just keep moving with your backs to each other and pay attention to your footing. Although the jetpacks of the power armors are enough to allow the two steel creations to leave the ground, they can only bring a short-term hovering effect. In the final analysis, the G2 model power armor is not equipped with a flight device, and the original intention of the jetpack design is to enhance the 3-dimensional mobility of the power armor, allowing the armor to move at high speed for a short period of time during combat. Therefore, the backpacks on the back of the two power armors can only maintain a maximum of 3 seconds of jet state at a time. This is a limitation engraved on the bottom layer of the armor system. Once the single jet time of the backpack exceeds 3 seconds, the parts inside the backpack will be irreversibly damaged. What made Sato even more troubled was that since the jetpack of the G2 power armor used fuel propulsion instead of air power, there was a limit to the number of times they could use it. Once the fuel in the backpack was used up, the two armors had to return to the ground to fight again. So Sato and Ozzy could only use the jetpack as a jumping tool. Every time they used it, they had to choose a good landing point and wait for the backpack to cool down before they could continue the next jump. Boom. Boom. With the loud noises of metal landing, the two power armors almost simultaneously landed on the platform wrapped in hardened flesh and blood with their backs facing each other. TSK. Manual control is not as stable as neural synchronization. Sato stood firm with a little effort, moving backwards while firing at the arm that had just grown out of the hardened flesh and blood. In the lower right corner of his panoramic display, there was a circular progress chart that was spinning. 3, 2, 1. Jetpack is ready. Bang. Bang. 4 dazzling beams of light once again spurted out from behind the two power armors, allowing the two to break free from the restraints that had not yet formed a complete encirclement. After the second jump, Sato found a piece of information that could barely be considered good news. Although all the buildings in the entire D4 area were corroded by hardened flesh and blood, this huge mass of flesh and blood did not seem to be considered a whole. Wherever Satoru and Owlsy had not stepped on, these brown hardened flesh and blood would not show any abnormalities. Only those places where the two passed by would new arms grow continuously. This strange phenomenon made Satoru suspect that the flesh and blood here were not only independent of each other, but also in a state similar to dormant. This state would only be lifted after being disturbed by him and Owlsy. This was the most reasonable explanation he could think of at the moment, because the area that the two had not stepped on during the jump did not grow new arms, but the arms only emerged from under the armored feet after the two landed. If this large piece of flesh and blood covering the buildings was really a hole, then it would not need to chase the two people behind, and it could completely block their way in advance. This was the most effective way. After discovering this pattern, Satoru only hated that Redden's military technology had left two power armors that did not have the ability to float for a long time to guard this place. If he and Owlsy could float all the way, why would they have to fight these disgusting things every time they landed? After the two power armors repeatedly went back and forth between the air and the ground 10 times, Satoru and Owlsy's fuel reserves were almost exhausted. At this moment, Satoru suddenly realized that the sound of airflow in his ears was already quite loud. After leaping into the air again, Satoru mustered up the courage to turn around and shine the searchlight not far in front of his head. A cave large enough to fit two mechas appeared in his retina. Chapter 135, Death Struggle. Current jet fuel remaining. 32%, 32%, up to 4 times. Satoru quickly calculated the possibility of himself and Owlsy reaching the cave. Because the two of them were basically in step, Satoru was sure that Owlsy's remaining fuel was almost the same as his. If Satoru and Owlsy only use the jetpack for instant acceleration, then the fuel could be used at least a dozen times. But the two of them use the jetpack almost as a floating device, and each time they used it, they maximumed it out in 3 seconds, so the fuel consumption rate was very terrifying. Satoru knew that the huge cave above their heads was the only hope of escape, but the embarrassing vertical height was not the goal that the jetpacks of the two power armors could reach. If he and Owlsy wanted to climb up from the cave, they had to use the artificial maintenance channel at the edge of the cave. Although the elevator and the maintenance channel must have been out of service, the ladder on the wall could still allow them to climb all the way to the edge of the cave, and then continue to climb up along the launch track on the cave. The only problem the two of them had to face now was that they still needed at least 5 jet jumps to get to the artificial maintenance channel. They were destined to finish the last short distance on the ground. Thinking of this, Satoru could only harden his heart and release his index finger that was about to pull the trigger. This was the last drum magazine on the power armor, and every bullet had to be used sparingly. Get out. After losing the source of firepower he relied on, Satoru could only pull out the tactical dagger on the waist of the power armor and desperately cut off these seaweed-like arms like crazy. Warning, 24% of the whole body armor is damaged. Jetpack is ready. Bang. Bang. As bright flames spurted out from the back of the armor, the two jumped into the air again. Looking at the legs that were about to turn red on the body damage panel, Satoru almost crushed the joystick. Just hold on for 3 more times. Current jet fuel remaining. 24%. The bloodstained blade fell off the handle, but before it fell completely to the ground, it was completely submerged by the newly grown pale arms. In order to avoid falling before the finish line, Satoru could only use both the dagger and the rifle. When his arms were about to wrap him up like a dumpling, he fired 2 shots, and then continued to swing the dagger with a new blade. Warning, 33% of the full body armor is damaged. 2 more rounds left. The protective plates on the legs of the power armor had been stripped off the body, and Satoru could even clearly hear the sound of these arms violently dismantling his calf parts. What's worse is that not only his bullets are insufficient, but also his replaceable blades. Jetpacks are ready. When the 2 power armors that exuded a bloody smell completed the jump, Satoru also took the opportunity to glance at his remaining ammunition. 47 rounds. And below the remaining ammunition, a blue dagger icon was lit. This means that the blade he was holding in his hand was the last one. The last time Satoyu, who was already bloodthirsty, numbly waved the dagger in his hand, and from time to time he felt that the legs of the armor were about to be completely chewed up, and replenished a few bullets with the rifle. Click. This time, the blade in Sato's hand broke, before it could even last until the replacement time. What a fucking piece of shit. Sato threw the empty handle aside without hesitation, and swung the thick butt of the gun in front of him. With the dull sound of hitting, the armor under Sato seemed to be getting heavier and heavier. Bang, bang, bang. Just when Sato was about to lose his mind, Daozi, who was standing aside, shot at the group of arms under Sato with a few bullets, and forcibly pulled the armor that was about to fall into the quagmire back to the edge of the cliff. Jetpacks are ready. Without verbal communication, the two armors full of broken bodies completed their last jump. 150 meters. After landing, Sato couldn't help shouting out the last distance they were going to sprint. At the same time, a moving carpet composed of countless arms also appeared behind the two of them, attacking the two battle-scarred armors like a gust of wind. Sato and Daozi fired all the bullets in their rifles. They didn't know how much time they could buy, so they could only believe intuitively that it was worth it. Run. After the two armors ran out of bullets, they threw away their rifles and unloaded the heavy jetpacks behind them. At this moment, Sato's sight was only the maintenance passage extending upward. It was as if it was a ladder from hell to the human world. But the two had just run 50 meters, and Daozi, who was in front of the queue, suddenly stopped. Just as Sato wanted to urge Daozi to move forward, the searchlight on the power armor revealed to him the reason why Daozi stopped. The platform under the feet of the two people was broken. A deep red blood lake with a diameter of 100 meters was lying quietly under the broken platform, without a ripple. Its shape and area just corresponded to the cave leading to the surface above Sato's head, and completely destroyed the possibility of the two going to the maintenance passage. Unknown energy activity detected. Unknown energy activity detected. Unknown energy activity detected. In the cockpit, 3 huge red pop-up windows were reflected in Sato's desperate pupils. The next second, the platform under the feet of the two people shook violently. Plop. A mecha made entirely of flesh and blood rushed out of the lake, stretched out its hand, and crushed the artificial maintenance channel that symbolized hope. How could it be? Even if this mecha did not turn around, Sato and Daozi could recognize its familiar outline and lines. Hero slowly turned around and stared at the tiny power mecha with dozens of bloated eyeballs on its head. Then, it completely crushed the maintenance channel, torn off in its hand into pieces. Daozi, I'll deal with Hero, and you deal with the arm behind you. After only half a second of silence, Sato firmly gave Daozi an order. Daozi immediately turned around after hearing Sato's order, and aimed the heavy sniper rifles and missile launchers on his shoulders at the approaching mobile carpet. At this moment, even Satoyu himself didn't know the meaning of doing this, as if this order was not only given to Daozi, but also to himself. He knew the firepower level of the power armor very well, and these missiles were not even as powerful as a punch from a real mecha. But Satoyu still locked the aiming frame on the disgusting eyeballs of Hero. Bang bang bang. Just as the sound of the missile launch exploded in Satoyu's ears, his eardrum suddenly caught another faint sound. Friendly mecha is approaching. Boom. A burly black figure suddenly landed from the cave above the two people's heads and used the red plasma axe blade in his hand to directly split Hero in two. Crossing Shine. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 136. The hero is missing. Before Satoyu could hear Crossing Shine's response, a second loud noise came from behind him. Crash. A huge amount of blood poured down along with the disintegrating rocks, and it directly submerged the still moving arm carpet like water pouring back from the sky. The next second, the blood-red manuscript 03 wrote on a humanoid monster whose appearance could not be distinguished, and fell into a pool of blood. Two orange-red high-frequency hot swords were inserted into the shoulders of the monster, and in Satoyu's energy radar, the red light spot symbolizing the monster was completely extinguished at this moment. 40 minutes ago, when crossing Shine and Beiying arrived at the entrance of Wuju Mountain Cave, they found that the hero who was supposed to stop here had disappeared. What was waiting for them were two hero signals in different directions. Crossing Shine and Beiying, who had suffered a loss once, fell into a dilemma again. So far, they still have not contacted Satoyu and Daozi, so they can't be sure which of the two hero signals is true. Although the messages sent by the two on the Iron Pilot communication channel did not receive a response, Kobayashi Suke on the public channel successfully connected with Crossing Shine and the others, and informed them of what had happened before, and the current whereabouts of Satoyu and the others. After hearing the real living people speak, Crossing Shine and Beiying immediately realized that the two hero signals were all fake. The tricky thing is that they don't know why the real hero was driven away without a driver, and they don't know where the hero was driven to. Fortunately, after the land desertification, once a behemoth like the hero moves, it will definitely leave traces that cannot be erased. Crossing Shine and Beiying quickly followed the traces to a plain behind Wuju Mountain. But strangely, the footprints disappeared completely here. It seems that they realized that Crossing Shine and Beiying did not take the bait. The heroes who were originally in different directions actually rushed to their positions at the same time. In less than 5 minutes, the two sides started a fierce battle on the plain. Since Yuzao had previously guessed that his opponent would continue to learn and become stronger in the battle in order to pursue a quick victory, he did not hesitate to turn on the overload mode and directly raised the intensity of this battle to another level. When delivering a fatal blow to the monster on the ground, the powerful force that Crossing Shine burst out directly smashed the alloy launch port covered under the sand and stones, causing the two people present and the monster's body to fall into the passage. Not long after, Crossing Shine and Beiying found that they had fallen into an underground area numbered E0. The whole place was large enough for Crossing Shine and Manuscript 03 to walk around in it, and all the man-made facilities here seemed to have been abandoned for a long time, as if they had experienced some terrible disaster, and they were all in bad shape. Until the two found a blood lake. The lake water was not deep, only enough to cover the Mecha's calves, and even the knees. But what surprised Yuzao and Beiying was that the liquid in the blood lake did not seem to be pure water or blood, but something that was a bit viscous and not low in temperature. Just as the two mechas waded into the middle of the lake, Yuzao and Beiying felt something grabbing their ankles at the same time. Then, dense pieces of flesh quickly wrapped around the bodies of the two mechas like vines and tried to continue growing on the mechas. At the same time, another giant slowly stood up from the blood lake in front of the two mechas, as if the two were witnessing the birth of monster. At the critical moment, Crossing Shine suddenly thought of the scene when he fought with the first monster before. At that time, the monster also tried to parasitize part of its body in Crossing Shine's body, but those leech-like creatures would decay and die rapidly once they touched his real body. So Crossing Shine decisively used the plasma axe blade to cut open the armor before he was completely strangled by the vines, allowing his blood to directly contact these pieces of flesh and drip into the blood lake under his feet. In an instant, the pieces of flesh wrapped around Crossing Shine withered on the spot, falling off like dead old bark. The lake water under the two mechas also began to boil after contacting Xingshan's blood. The originally calm lake surface instantly had countless bubbles. The thick white smoke emitted by the warming lake water also shrouded the two people's sight in a mist. Roar. The monster that had not yet been shaped let out an almost crazy roar, and Beiying drew out his double swords and stabbed it as soon as he broke free. Perhaps it was because the evaporation of the blood lake caused changes in the geological structure, or perhaps it was simply because Manuscript 03 pounced on the monster with only a mouth on its face in front of it, and the rock layer carrying the blood lake had countless cracks in an instant. In the blink of an eye, the two fell into the process of falling again. So Sato Zion and Daozi saw the current picture. What is going on? Seeing the two mechas appearing beside him one after the other, Sato Zion's brain suddenly became a little dull. He didn't expect to see Xingshan and Beiying here. Colonel Sato, Daozi. Crossing Shine pulled the giant axe out of the body of Hero. Where did you drive the Mecha to? Didn't the hero stop at the entrance of the Wuju Mountain Cave? Hearing Crossing Shine's question, Sato Zion felt even more confused. Not at the entrance of the cave. What? Before Sato's Ion questioned Crossing Shine, everyone's feet shook violently again. Come up. Crossing Shine, who realized the danger, immediately stretched out his hand to Sato's Ion and Dalsy. In fact, as early as the moment Crossing Shine opened his mouth, Sato's Ion and Dalsy had already jumped into the blood lake in front of them. Click. Just as the two miniature power armors fell on Crossing Shine's palms, everyone heard a crisp cracking sound. It was like someone dropped a vase on the ground. Then, countless dazzling lights lit up at the same time at this moment, illuminating this vast space as bright as day. What appeared in everyone's eyes was a huge space completely covered with flesh and blood. Everything here was made up of dark red plasma and brown hardened flesh and blood. The whole scene looked like they were in the belly of a giant beast, making people feel uncomfortable and horrified. But now, all the brown hardened flesh was covered with fine cracks. In a series of noises, these seemingly solid shells began to break. The surging blood plasma gushed out from the ground under everyone's feet like a fountain, and the flesh exposed from the shell danced wildly in the bright space, as if performing a ceremony to welcome the new life. In the blood, two angular giants slowly stood up in the water waves. They were Crossing Shine and Manuscript 03. Chapter 137 Mirror Image Enemy. Fuck, are you kidding me? Sato Zion felt that his brain was blank now. The large amount of information that appeared in just 1 minute almost made his brain stop working completely. He had no time to think about how all this happened. He only knew that he and Dalsy were pulled back from the brink of death by Crossing Shine and Beiying, but now everyone is back on the edge of the cliff. But what made Sato Zion most upset was that he and Dalsy were only driving power armor like ants, and the heroes of the two were nowhere to be found. Can you even copy me? Yuzaro looked at Crossing Shine holding another white bone axe, as if facing a great enemy, with a pair of red eyes full of murderous intent. It seems that the answer to all the secrets is here. On the other side, Beiying, who was standing in the cockpit of Manuscript 03, also controlled the Mecha to stand up from the monster's body, and posed the same fighting posture to Manuscript 03. I just don't know if its cockpit is a weakness. Try it and you'll know. Crossing Shine protected Sato Zion and Dalsy in front of his chest, while sweeping the axe behind him with his other hand. You can put us in the cockpit. Sato knew that he and Dalsy were now equivalent to having no fighting power, so he was very self-aware and proposed this suggestion that would not hinder Crossing Shine's battle. After the last upgrade, I no longer have a cockpit. Couldn't you two change positions when you jumped from my head? Although Sato had guessed that this might be the result, when he really heard Crossing Shine say that he didn't have a cockpit, his heart still clicked. We didn't expect the ground to collapse, let alone you were down there. Even Yuzaro didn't expect things to develop to this point. Damn, it's rushing towards you. Almost at the moment when Sato roared, Crossing Shine had already rushed towards himself with a battle axe in one hand. At the same time, Beiying, who was driving the Manuscript 03, also sprinted towards the replica. Sato didn't expect Crossing Shine to take the initiative to attack while holding him and Dalsy. In his opinion, this was simply a suicidal act. But he was wrong. At the moment, when the two giants were about to engage in battle, Crossing Shine suddenly turned his body to the side, dodged the opponent's attack at the moment of swinging the giant axe, and directly cut off half of the opponent's shoulder. Beiying used the full joint jet to jump up and left two hot wounds on the opponent's shoulder with his double swords in the air. After the first round, Crossing Shine and Manuscript 03 were already standing back to back. Here you go. Without a moment's hesitation, Crossing Shine directly handed over Sato and Dalsy, who were protected in his hands, to Beiying. Beiying did not hesitate to unfold the sturdy armor on his chest and let the two people enter the cockpit smoothly. Do you want us to wear power armor all the time? As soon as Sato and Dalsy came in, they drove the power armor straight to the back of Beiying, so as not to hinder Beiying's sight. The fixing frame in the cockpit is obviously designed for people, and a big guy like a power armor certainly cannot be fastened with a seatbelt. But if Sato and Dalsy get off the power armor, there is no guarantee that the two armors will not fall over and bump around in the Mecha battle. You get off, I'll use magnetic attraction to fix them. Even this function? Sato and Dalsy jumped off the armor and fastened their seat belts. saying that they had never seen such an advanced cockpit. Although this function is also available on the combat uniforms of the pilots, it is the first time that Sato has seen this function directly in the cockpit. Magnetic attraction system has been activated. As the system prompt sounded, the floor under the feet of the two power armors instantly changed from blue to red. Hold on. As Beiying's voice fell, the power reactor of Manuscript 03 was directly increased to the highest power, and it launched an attack on the opponent again. However, what she didn't expect was that the opponent actually unfolded the X-shaped wing armor behind him, revealing multiple dark red launch holes. Bang bang bang. 4 huge tumors burst out from the launch hole and split into more than 20 small flying insects with flesh and blood wings in the air, crashing into the still running Manuscript 03 with a strange flight route. The next second, more than 20 green flames exploded all over the body of Manuscript 03, almost causing the still moving body to fall to the ground. Warning, 47% of the full body armor is damaged. White Shadow. Sato Yu grabbed the protective rod in front of him with his hands. The impact caused by the explosion was quite severe. If there were no fasteners, he and Ozzy would have been thrown against the wall in the cockpit. TSK. The power is greater than the original missile. White Shadow slowly straightened up, and Manuscript 03, who had established neural synchronization with her, also stood up. Although the opponent's imitation attack was not very lethal, because of the small power of her own missile attack, she did not expect that the opponent could even copy the missile attack. At the moment when White Shadow launched the attack, Crossing Cheyenne also swung the giant axe at himself at 60% of his performance. As he expected, the red plasma axe blade easily chopped off the opponent's bone axe. But before Crossing Cheyenne's axe blade touched its body, the opponent had already dropped the axe and dodged Crossing Cheyenne's slash with a flexible side dodge. Then, Crossing Cheyenne used its thick shoulder to hit Yuziro. Even if Yuziro's brain reacted, the body that had not yet recovered its normal performance had no time to change its posture. After a deafening roar, Crossing Cheyenne, holding the giant axe, was knocked back to the position where he launched the charge. If the giant axe had not cut a crack of dozens of meters long on the ground, covered with flesh and blood, Crossing Cheyenne would definitely not be in a half-kneeling posture at this time. At the end of the second round, neither Yuziro nor Beiying had an advantage. Can't you deal with yourself? Beiying carefully felt the liquid steel memory armor that was repairing itself, but she knew that the opponent would only destroy it faster than Manuscript 03 could repair it. I used the overload mode before, and now the performance of the machine is only 60% of the normal level. Yuziro stared at Crossing Cheyenne, who was generating a new battle axe from his body with reluctance. How long is the overload cooling time? 5 minutes. I can't open it too many times in a day. Using it once more is already my limit. This time is enough for the two of them to tear us into pieces. Beiying's expression became quite serious. The enemy she and Crossing Cheyenne are currently facing is no longer on the same level as the previous hero. But the other party does not intend to give the two time to continue communicating. The moment the giant axe in the hand of Crossing Cheyenne finished growing, the two monsters attacked at the same time. In a flash, Yuziro suddenly shouted his tactics to Beiying. Switch positions. You deal with me, and I'll deal with you. Chapter 138. Position change tactics. Beiying didn't know why Crossing Cheyenne wanted to change his opponent. In her opinion, if even Crossing Cheyenne couldn't deal with his mirror image, then Manuscript 03 would only die faster. In terms of strength, once Crossing Cheyenne's bone axe hits him, the power will definitely not be much weaker than the original body. In terms of speed, even if Crossing Cheyenne doesn't use the overload mode of the original body, Manuscript 03 probably won't be able to crush it. But Yuziro doesn't think so. Maybe the Manuscript 03 driven by Beiying may not be as strong as Crossing Cheyenne in all aspects, but Yuziro didn't intend to let Beiying deal with it from the beginning. The reason why he did this was just because he could only exert 60% of his normal level now. If compared with Manuscript 03, he might not be able to hold on longer than Beiying in this state. But even if he can't use 100% of his strength now, he is definitely stronger than Manuscript 03 in terms of strength alone. That's why Yuzao asked the two sides to exchange enemies. What he had to do was to take advantage of his strengths and avoid his weaknesses to get rid of Manuscript 03, and what Beiying had to do was to survive the attack of Crossing Shan before Yuzao got rid of the enemy. I will support you immediately after the battle here, and what you have to do is to delay enough time, understand? Yuzao expressed his tactical intentions in brief words. After all, the two of them had no chance to say a second sentence now. Boom. Beiying didn't even have time to say receive before the white bone battle axe from Crossing Shan had already hit the position where Manuscript 03 was standing, splashing blood-colored water 10 meters high. If Beiying hadn't reacted quickly and had stepped aside before the battle axe landed, she would not be able to stand in the cockpit of the machine alive now. TSK. Beiying knew that once she and Crossing Shan got into a close combat, she would definitely be passive, so she seized the opportunity before the other party pulled out the battle axe and decisively used the full joint jet nozzle to push the machine to the back, trying to keep some distance. When the Manuscript 03 was halfway back, Crossing Shan, who had not yet stood up completely, suddenly stretched out his right hand towards Beiying. The next second, a bone chain that seemed to be made of spine suddenly rushed towards Manuscript 03 like a python. Chain sword. Beiying recognized this iconic equipment that the original body had at a glance. The body has switched to assault mode, facing Crossing Shan. Beiying did not dare to be careless. Even though the Manuscript 03's body had not been completely cooled, she still forced the strongest assault mode to start. The tip of the chainsword finally stopped only 2 meters away from Manuscript 03, and Beiying continued to control the Mecha to complete the last distance of retreat. 183, 182, 181. A blue ring timer was placed in front of Beiying's eyes. Every time the flashing holographic cursor circled, it meant that the duration of the assault mode was reduced by 1 second. The goal is just to stay alive. Beiying unconsciously clenched the two swords in her hands. Unlike the last time she killed Hero, the pressure she felt now was almost suffocating her. On the other side, when Crossing Shan just took a step, Manuscript 03 had already pulled out 2 slender white bone swords and chopped them over. Clang. With the loud noise of the collision between metal and bones, the dancing flesh and blood walls around the two giants all burst and shattered. It seems that I underestimated you. Although Crossing Shan successfully blocked the slashing of the 2 bone swords with the black axe handle, the power that Manuscript 03 exploded was much more terrifying than Yuzao thought. Just when Yuzao thought that the opponent would continue to compete with him in strength, Manuscript 03 suddenly retracted his 2 swords and used a roundhouse kick at Crossing Shan's abdomen at an extremely fast speed. Knowing that he couldn't move his body to dodge, Yuzao suddenly turned the horizontal axe handle in his hand vertically and used it to block the movement trajectory of the opponent's calf. The giant leg as thick as a rock pillar suddenly hit the black axe handle, and the violent vibration made Yuzao feel numb in his palm for a moment. It's my turn. While Manuscript 03's leg had not been completely pulled back, Yuzao took advantage of the situation and wrapped the chainsword hidden under his arm around the opponent's leg. Countless sharp sword teeth immediately hooked into the flesh and blood of Manuscript 03, tightly binding its calf like iron wire. Yuzao, who found the right time, grabbed his chainsword. He instantly felt the strong pulling force from the other end of the chainsword, but this did not prevent him from using all his strength to pull the opponent towards himself. In terms of speed, Crossing Shan may not be able to overwhelm Manuscript 03 now, but as long as he can make the opponent compete with him in strength, Yuzao will have a great chance of winning this competition. Sure enough, when Manuscript 03 can only stand on one leg, Crossing Shan's strength has almost shown a trend of crushing. But just when Yuzao was ready to swing the giant axe, he suddenly heard a sound of flesh and blood churning. The calf that was entangled by the chainsword began to mutate, and the growing flesh expanded rapidly like a balloon connected to an air pump, and soon completely covered the silver metal chainsword. Puff! In the blink of an eye, the swollen flesh and blood burst in the air, exploding into a cloud of blood mist floating in the light and shadow. Manuscript 03 broke free from the restraints of Xingshan's chainsword by breaking off one of its legs. It threw away the bone sword in its hand and retreated with its only 3 remaining limbs with both hands on the ground. At the same time, new flesh and blood were growing from its broken legs. Want to escape? Almost at the moment when the chainsword left the target, Xingqian had already rushed towards the opponent with his giant axe. He couldn't let go of this precious opportunity. In less than 5 seconds, Xingqian caught up with Manuscript 03, who was trying to distance himself with a twisted posture. It was because its movement method was so uncoordinated that Xingqian had a chance to catch up with it. But before Xingqian could swing his axe, more than a dozen full-joint jet ports made of bones appeared on the body of Manuscript 03. With the help of the viscous liquid, Manuscript 03 dodged the slash of the plasma axe blade at an extremely thrilling angle, successfully delayed the time for the new limbs to grow, and jumped back. Bang, bang, bang. Manuscript 03, which was still in the air, unfolded the X-shaped wing armor on its back again, and more than 20 self-destructing flying insects came out in an irregular flight trajectory and crashed into Xingqian, who had missed the attack. The green flames were as gorgeous as emeralds under the dazzling lights, and the thick smoke and blood mist immediately enveloped Xingqian's huge body, covering everything around him. Xingqian, Beiying, who had just dodged a battle axe attack, couldn't help but shout loudly at the explosion, but Xingqian's pursuit behind her made her have no time to pay attention to the situation of others. 121, 120, 119. The countdown of the assault mode was still ticking, but the situation was still tilting against them. What should I do? Beiying gritted his teeth. Chapter 139, Blood Burning Poison. Hardened. A burly figure rushed out of the thick smoke. His whole body was shrouded in a depressing black color, and even the dazzling light could not penetrate the black. The powerful explosion did not leave a single scar on Xingqian's body, and the impact from all parts of his body only slightly slowed down his pace. The current performance of the machine has recovered to 70% of the standard value, even if only 10% of the level has been restored. Xingqian's various abilities have reached the level of being able to deal with Manuscript 03. Although Manuscript 03 inherited the structure of the main body and was more than enough to surpass most mechas in terms of mobility, Manuscript 03 also did not have the functions that the main body did not have. For example, flying. Boom. Almost at the moment when Manuscript 03 landed, the giant axe in Xingqian's hand had already torn the bloody air. The red plasma axe blade slanted down along the shoulder of Manuscript 03 like a hot knife cutting butter, and finally pulled out from its tight waist. The Manuscript 03 that was still alive and kicking in the last second had now been completely split into 2. But Yuzio did not intend to stop there. Xingqian swung his giant axe directly at the upper body of Manuscript 03 that had just landed, and cleanly separated its head from its body. Even so, in Yuzio's sight, countless new granulations continued to emerge from the broken ends under the high temperature left by the plasma axe blade until they were burned black and would continue to be replaced in a new round of granulation growth. Just as Yuzio expected, the monsters here were no longer afraid of the so-called fatal injuries, and their bodies showed amazing vitality. Even if all the limbs were disassembled, they could not stop them from surviving independently. At the critical moment, Yuzio's mind suddenly flashed back to what he had done before the fall. The next moment, he used the hot plasma axe blade to cut his arm, and poured his blood on the body of Manuscript 03 that was still repairing itself. Sizzle. When the black liquid came into contact with the huge body, the strong and disgusting smell of burning spread in the air like a bomb. All the wriggling tentacles and granulations turned into pieces of rotten meat in an instant, as if the body was lying on a frying pan with a high fire, releasing thick white and yellow smoke. Until then, Yuzio was finally able to confirm that his blood was a deadly poison to these monsters with almost infinite vitality. Warning, 63% of the whole body armor was damaged. At the other end of the battlefield, the real Manuscript 03 had just taken a blow from the Xingqian bone axe. Even though Beiying had tried his best to make the opponent's attack deviate from the expected landing point, there was still a huge wound 5 meters deep on the right shoulder of the body. 94, 93, 92. Beiying panted and put the 2 swords against her chest. At this moment, the countdown of the assault mode looked more like a death knell to her. Due to the lack of strength, after several attacks and defenses, there were already no less than 10 broken gaps on the two orange-yellow high-frequency hot swords. According to Beiying's calculations, if Crossing Shine's next battle axe swing still maintained the same level of output, then within 5 rounds, the two melee weapons of Manuscript 03 would be completely scrapped. The repair speed of liquid steel can't keep up with the damage to the body. Beiying looked at the body damage monitoring panel that was already red, and his eyes were full of anxiety. Behind Beiying, Satoyu was staring at the Crossing Shine, who was ready to go on the big screen. After the two sides entered the battle, he had not said a word. After all, each Iron Pilot has his own unique combat style. As long as it is not a life-threatening behavior, Satoyu will not easily interfere with the other party. In less than 2 minutes, Sato and Aozi had thoroughly seen how Shiro controlled this white mecha known for its flexibility. In Sato's opinion, Shiro had almost brought all the advantages of Manuscript 03 to the extreme. What made him sad was that he and Aozi could only sit here and watch Shiro and Xingqian fight for their lives, and they didn't even know the whereabouts of Heioji. The only thing they could do now was to protect themselves, not to interfere with Shiro and Xingqian's combat ideas, and not to become a burden to them. Damn. This deep sense of helplessness has rarely been encountered since Sato became a pilot, but now he can only hold the fixer in front of him until it creaks. Just when Sato felt guilty for not being able to help, Xingqian holding the bone battle axe had already rushed to Manuscript 03's face with his weapon. The opponent's speed was even faster than before. Continuously learning in battle, becoming stronger with each battle, is exactly what Crossing Shine said. As early as 30 seconds ago, the Manuscript 03 controlled by Beiying had already lost any advantage in speed. This also directly led to the Manuscript 03 she controlled being unable to distance herself from the opponent and could only be forced to get involved in close combat again and again, facing the opponent's fierce attack from the front. The situation is just like now. Beiying has no time to control the mecha to dodge. She can only hope that the two swords in her hands will not break in this defense. Boom. At the critical moment, Crossing Shine suddenly hit his copy from the side with his shoulder. With a loud noise like a landslide, the seemingly indestructible Crossing Shine flew out on the spot, fell heavily on the flesh and blood wall covered with tentacles, and smashed a large string of blood flowers. "I'll attack, you cover." Yuzao stuck the giant axe into the ground, patted the shoulder he had just used to hit, and wiped off all the flesh and blood stuck on the black armor. Okay. For Beiying, cooperating with Crossing Shine is basically the tactic she is most familiar with. The machine has switched to balance mode, watching the countdown at the number 85 disappear from her sight. Beiying's tense nerves can finally relax a little. She has finally completed the task assigned to her by Crossing Shine and survived. 2 against 1. The chances of winning are much better. Sato Uaya, who was sitting on the fixator, relaxed his brows a little, and Aozi showed an expression of surviving a disaster. Boom. Boom. Crossing Shine, who had been lying in the deep pit for nearly 5 seconds, clenched his bone battle axe again, and stepped on the blood-covered floor with his feet again. The half of its body that was hit looked a little shriveled at this time, but countless dancing buds were constantly repairing its injuries like textile threads. "Are you ready?" Yuzao pulled out the giant axe stuck in the ground, and his eyes focused coldly on his replica. Of course. Beiying was also ready to launch a surprise attack at any time. Okay, attack. Chapter 140, Violent Slash. The two Xingqians ran towards each other in exactly the same posture. They used their right feet to exert force together, and each time they moved forward, they took the same distance. Before they collided, they simultaneously turned the giant axe dragging on the ground into a two-handed grip, and fearlessly chopped at each other's right shoulder. But just as the two of them raised their axes over their shoulders, they changed their attack positions together. Boom. The white bone handle and the black axe handle collided fiercely, causing a circle of airflow shocks visible to the naked eye. The two giant axes were swung by the axe holders, blocking each other's attack trajectory, forming a stalemate between the two. Is my fighting style too obvious? Yuzao was secretly surprised in his heart. He didn't expect that the opponent's movements had reached the point where they could be completely unified with himself. Even the temporary changes were exactly the same. Yuzao's original plan to use the plasma axe blade to destroy the opponent's weapons was therefore frustrated. Although Xingshan's performance has recovered to 70% of the normal level, when facing the replica that has evolved to keep pace with him, his strength has begun to show signs of falling behind. This power, Yuzao felt as if he was fighting against a moving mountain of flesh, and the huge pressure was constantly coming from the axe handle he was holding. But in just a moment, Yuzao was about to lose in this power contest. White Shadow. Just when Xingshan's giant axe was about to be pressed back to his shoulder, a white figure suddenly jumped high from behind Xingshan. The agile body of Manuscript 03 blocked the dazzling light source, and the shadow of the full body armor unfolded like a butterfly reflected in a pool of blood. Two high-frequency hot swords with scars of battle slashed in the air at high speed, pointing directly at the head of Xingshan. Puff. The splashing blood plasma splashed all over the body, controlled by Beiying, and as two orange-red lights flashed in the air, the two arms of Xingshan also rolled to the side. It's really difficult. Beiying couldn't help but hold the two swords in his hands tighter. The previous blow should have chopped off the opponent's head, but seeing that the attack was about to succeed, Xingshan gave up the confrontation with the main body at the critical moment and retreated violently. The crossed and dancing double swords could only cut the two thick arms of Xingshan in the end. No time to sigh. Yuzao ignored the two arms that were still twitching on the ground, and directly swung the giant axe, and rushed towards Xingshan who had just stood firm. Because he saw that the opponent's arms were regenerating at an extremely exaggerated speed. The red plasma axe blade left a dazzling afterimage in the air, but Yuzao did not hit the target he wanted to attack. The opponent's agility seemed to be much higher than he imagined. But Yuzao would not give up the attack because of this. He kept swinging the giant axe and forced the opponent into a corner in just 3 rounds. This is a blow. Seeing that the opponent had nowhere to hide, Yuzao deliberately wrapped the chainsword around the axe handle and swung a huge sweep towards the enemy's position. After all, Xingshan could no longer avoid the attack by moving forward or backward, and moving left and right became its only way to dodge. The sweep that Yuzao used basically covered all the positions where the opponent could hide. No matter where it fled, it would have a close contact with the plasma axe blade. However, after the black giant axe drew a semicircle in the air, it returned to Yuzao's hand in its original form. He missed again. The reason was beyond his expectation, but it was within his acceptable range. I saw that Xingshan suddenly jumped up at the moment when the giant axe was about to cut it in half, and rubbed the hot wind brought by the plasma axe blade to dodge this seemingly sure attack. Yuzao ignored the opponent's mobility on the 3-dimensional axis. After all, this is a move that even the original body can hardly do in normal mode. Now it seems that the replica of Xingshan does not seem to have inherited all the characteristics of the original body 100%. At least there are still some differences in the shortcomings. I'll do it. Just when Xingshan's sweep failed to hit the target, Beiying also chased up in his mecha and unfolded the X-shaped wing armor behind the body. 24 split missiles immediately locked onto Xingshan, who was still in the ascending stage, and directly bombarded its chest, exploding a series of blue sparks. Yuzao immediately rushed to the only possible place where Xingshan could fall with the giant axe that had just returned to his hand. The next second, the two Xingshan sides fell on each other. Puff. Xingshan's body, which was hanging upside down, had not had time to land, and the red plasma axe blade had cut its waist. Countless pieces of flesh and blood were still trying to connect to the broken limbs at this moment, but the short-lived high temperature continued to burn these restless flesh buds. Because Yuzao's axe was too powerful, the huge broken limbs of Xingshan even deviated from the original landing point, and the giant axe that broke its body fell into the pool of blood on the left. Similarly, Yuzao had no intention of stopping his own replica. He immediately cut open his arm and poured the black blood on the two halves of Xingshan. Sizzle. In an instant, the broken limbs and arms that were still growing new flesh and blood emitted bursts of white and yellow smoke, and a pungent fishy smell began to spread everywhere. Xingshan died in an unwilling struggle. Every piece of flesh and blood that was once full of vitality now looked like roasted old rotten meat, tightly wrinkled in a twisted manner. Just in case, Yuzao also poured his own blood on the two broken arms of Xingshan, completely eliminating the possibility of the monster's regeneration. Is it over? Beiyang asked this question carefully until the two Mecha replicas stopped moving. I don't think so. After hesitating for a moment, Yu Zhao slowly turned around with the giant axe in his hand and looked at Beiyang. Drop, drop, drop. At this moment, the sound of the energy radar scanning was still echoing in the ears of the two. Yu Zhao's sight moved away from the Mecha driven by Beiyang and slowly swept across the area as bright as day. Endless blood. Even though the two monsters had fallen, Yu Zhao didn't dare to guarantee whether there would be new copies born from the blood under their feet. After all, even hero can be mass produced, so it doesn't seem impossible to mass produce Crossing Shine and Manuscript 03. In fact, even if there are no more copies, everything in this area still reveals distortion and madness. There are also countless buds and tentacles dancing on the walls covered with flesh and blood, as if the two mechas just killed not their compatriots, but just performed a wonderful life and death duel for them as audience. The whole space is alive. Beiyang, who realized the deep meaning of Yu Zhao's words, also looked at everything around with disgust, but at this moment she couldn't think of any way to destroy this vast underground space. Gurgle, gurgle. At this moment, several huge bubbles suddenly emerged from an area shrouded in shadows. Chapter 141 Parasitic Red Tide. If we can't destroy the flesh and blood covering this place, even if we blow up the mountain, it will be useless. Until then, Sato Yu, who had not spoken for a long time, finally spoke to the two. This should be the monster research facility secretly built by Gemini Medical and Reden's military technology. It seems that the mess they left behind is really big. Now he can draw a conclusion that Gemini Medical and Reden's military technology must have been conducting high-risk experiments that violate the Watcher Covenant here for the past 6 years. For many years, once all monsters are discovered, the Watcher Alliance has the obligation to dispatch Mobile Armor Corps to annihilate them, and after the war, the ownership of the monster corpses also belongs to the Watcher Alliance. According to the regular process, these monster corpses will be transferred to the nearest Omega branch and handled by the Monster Research Institute that specializes in handling such matters. Only in very rare cases does Omega need to transport complete monster corpses or part of the monster organization directly to the headquarters or other branches for research. However, in the process of fighting between mechas and monsters, both sides will inevitably have some parts or small fragments falling on the battlefield. If someone takes these things away before the Alliance's recovery team comes to clean up, the Alliance will also try its best to track down the target until the relevant materials are found. But no matter how powerful the Alliance is, it cannot control every part of the mecha or every drop of blood of the monster. There will always be a small amount of monster fragments or mecha parts illegally circulated in the market. Even if the Alliance is trying its best to crack down on related industries, this kind of black market transaction still emerges in various places where monster wars have broken out. Although Sato Xiang has heard about the fact that major biomedical groups secretly purchase such contraband at high prices, looking at the facility wrapped in flesh and blood in front of him, Sato Xiang still feels a chill in his spine. Even Omega can't fully control things, but these companies are bold enough to build such a large underground facility to conduct monster experiments. Twin Medical, Reden's military technology, monster research. Beiyang was confused. Although she had heard these 3 words, she couldn't understand them when they were put into a sentence by Sato Yu. Yu Zhao was in almost the same mood as Beiyang. We'll tell you the details after we resolve the crisis. In short, a giant in the biomedical field joined forces with another giant in the military manufacturing field to build this underground facility 6 years ago without the knowledge of the Alliance. But something went wrong and turned this place into the mess it is now. It sounds like it should be a very complicated case. After listening to Sato Yu's summary, Beiyang roughly understood that this was a major incident that had to be handled by the Alliance. The question is, what should we do now? I really want to say that we can just leave, but I have to tell you that there are still hundreds of elderly people in the air raid shelter of Wuju Mountain who need drug treatment. Sato Yu felt a pang of pain in his heart when he thought of the look in Kobayashi's eyes as he and Daozia left. But it's not very convenient for us to leave now. Sato Yu was telling the truth. Crossing Shine and Manuscript 03 both fell from the surface, but it would not be easy to go up again. I should have a way to deal with these disgusting things. Yuzao finally spoke at this time. You're not going to use the trick I thought of, are you? That's a bit too cruel. From the performance in the battle just now, Sato Xiang had roughly guessed what Crossing Shine would do. We still haven't explored 2/3 of this area. Maybe there are other ways. Beiyang also keenly realized something and hurriedly tried to stop Crossing Shine. Let's try my method first. If it doesn't work, we'll talk about it later. Before Sato Xiang and Beiyang could continue, Yuzao cut the wound on his wrist that had not yet healed a little bigger. The black blood immediately dripped into the pool of blood under everyone's feet like a trickle. In an instant, steam like smoke rose from Crossing Shine's body, and countless bubbles of different sizes burst on the boiling water. The sudden increase in water temperature even made Yuzao himself feel a little hot. As more and more blood flowed down Crossing Shine's arm, everyone soon discovered that they were stepping on real rocks. Even this blood is conscious. Sato Xiang looked at everything in front of him in surprise. The blood, which seemed to be just some kind of liquid, no longer filled the vacancies that had evaporated, which directly led to the formation of a circular safe zone centered on Crossing Shine at the position where everyone was standing. As the safe zone continued to spread outward, the coverage area of the dark red blood was shrinking little by little. It turns out that we have been stepping on these disgusting creatures. Beiyang took a look at the soles of his feet that had just faded away from the blood and couldn't help feeling hairy all over. Plop. Just as Satoyu and Beiyang were sighing, Crossing Shine suddenly half knelt on the ground holding the axe handle. Stop first. Beiyang rushed up without hesitation and covered Crossing Shine's still bleeding wound. This is the only effective method at present. Yuzao slowly pushed away Manuscript 03's hand, letting the black blood continue to flow down. Don't worry, I'm not stupid enough to bleed myself to death. Although Yuzao said this, he could already feel that his body was becoming weaker and weaker. Hematopoiesis and self-repair were not difficult for Yuzao, who had already transformed into a living being, but he had to use all the energy in his body to maintain his life at this time. What you said doesn't match your current state at all. Sato Xiang couldn't help but dissuade him. Even if you don't bleed yourself to death, you can't deal with emergencies in your current state, right? Yuzao couldn't deny Sato Xiang's statement. Even if he stopped bleeding now, his body would need 30 seconds to recover to the level where he could fight. After 3 seconds of silence, Yuzao silently blocked his wound with black armor. At the same time, the blood that was originally retreating suddenly rushed towards the open space under everyone's feet like a surging wave. However, when the blood spread to the souls of the two mechas again, Yuzao sent a data packet to everyone present. This is it. Almost at the moment of seeing the content of the data packet, Beiyang controlled the Mecha to lift his feet from the blood. What Yuzao sent was a real-time monitoring module, which was similar to the damage monitoring map of the Mecha, except that the value monitored by this monitoring module was not physical damage, but the concentration of some substance hidden in the steel structure. Invisible corrosion. Yuzao continued Beiyang's words. Just like the first monster vomited out parasites, this blood will seep into the body in a way that we cannot detect. I just noticed it when I saw them retreating on their own initiative. Just when the blood that Yuzao released earlier spread to the feet of Manuscript 03, he suddenly realized that the body controlled by Beiyang seemed to send out a signal that could not be detected by conventional means. It was a distress signal that only Yuzao could feel. Chapter 142 Silent War. Do you feel any strange symptoms in the body? Although Yuzao could sense the distress signal from Manuscript 03, he was not a sharp-eyed person after all. Manuscript 03 looked almost unchanged from the outside, and Yuzao could not rush up and peel off all the external armor of the opponent just to verify whether the distress signal that only he received was real. If you mean physical damage, then my current situation is not too bad. Beiyang answered Yuzao's question while looking at the monitoring module he had just received, but from the monitoring module you sent me, the degree of blood erosion on the body is almost 50%. On the monitoring screen, countless small particles flashing red light wrapped around the legs of Manuscript 03 and kept crawling towards the waist of the body. With the idea of finding out, Beiyang mustered up the courage to enlarge the picture full of moving particles, wanting to see clearly what was entangled with his mecha. The next second, Beiyang couldn't help but cover his mouth with his hand. That was a picture that could only be seen clearly under the precision of a microscope. The particles that looked like spheres were actually cell-level organisms covered with pus. From the appearance, their outlines were more like the meatballs that Sato and Daozi had seen in the B2 area before, except that these guys covered with pus did not have human hands and faces, but instead had a lot of furry tentacles. These macro meatballs did not act alone. Perhaps out of instinct, they would use their tentacles to touch the pus on the surface of other meatballs. Once two meatballs came into contact in this way, they would stand like glue and would never separate again. Under the overlapping, the dirty meatballs used this method to weave a slowly creeping large net. This brown large net was like floating algae on the sea, constantly rising and falling with the movement of the body. Warning, the body was attacked by an unknown attack, and the synchronization rate has dropped to 77%. The moment the system warning popped up, the cockpit where Beiyang was located was quickly surrounded by red warning lights. They are trying to seize control of the machine. As soon as Beiyang finished speaking, the legs of Manuscript 03 were instantly dyed blood red, which was incompatible with the paint of the machine itself. Hold on. Seeing that the blood red color was spreading wildly above the waist of Manuscript 03, Yuzao immediately forced himself to stand up. He had to use his own blood to get rid of the microorganisms entangled in Beiyang's body. The machine is starting to lose control. In the cockpit, Beiyang felt a splitting headache, as if someone was holding a buzzing chainsaw to cut the neural connection between her and Manuscript 03. Warning, the synchronization rate has dropped to 69%. As Beiyang screamed in pain, the silver-white mecha she was driving began to lose control. Boom. Before Yuzao could drip his blood on Manuscript 03, the other party had already stepped out with blood-red legs and rushed to an area flooded with blood at a speed that Crossing Shine could not catch up with at the moment. Shiro, wake up. Sato Yu, who was sitting on the fixture, yelled at Shiro who was kneeling on the control seat, quickly disconnect the neural synchronization. No, not yet. At this moment, Shiro suddenly felt that she had returned to the scene where she was about to drown in the sea, but this time it was not her consciousness that was trapped in chasing the little rabbit, but her body. You can't control the mecha in your current state. If you want to survive, cut off the connection. Sato Yu had already touched the safety buckle, ready to force Shiro away from the control seat at any time. If you disconnect now, the mecha will be completely out of control. Shiro hugged her white hair tightly with both hands. She was desperately fighting against the invisible enemies in her mind. I can't give them control of Manuscript 03. If the mecha is broken, it can be rebuilt, but if you lose your life, you will lose everything. Sato Yu couldn't watch Shiro sacrifice her life to control the mecha. They will erode the cockpit and eat all three of us. Shiro, with her eyes closed, gritted her teeth and said the result she had just learned. Fuck. After cursing, Sato Yu was completely desperate. He ignored the violent shaking of the cockpit, forcibly untied the restraint and seat belt on his body, and rushed to the control position, where Beiyang was. Gulp. At this moment, Manuscript 03 just jumped over a cylindrical building that was blocking the road, causing Sato Yu, who had just jumped off the restraint, to lose his center of gravity and slam into the iron wall in the cockpit. Don't leave the restraint. Seeing that Daozi was about to jump off the restraint, Sato Yu supported his body with the wall. Beiyang, who was kneeling on the magnetic alloy plate, also heard the sound of Sato Yu being injured, but the load on her brain had made it a luxury for her to even speak. Tears flowed out of Beiyang's eyes uncontrollably, slid down her face to the edge of her chin, merged with the sweat beads reflecting the red warning light, and finally dripped onto the slightly hot floor. Beiyang has put all her consciousness into this smokeless tug-of-war, and her body is on the verge of losing control. The instinct of survival is frantically sending warnings to her consciousness, but Beiyang still protects her precarious neural synchronization link without looking back. You are really Satoyu didn't even have time to say a word. Daozi, who had jumped off the fixture, had already rushed under him and used his petite body to support Satoyu's solid arms. Gudang. Manuscript 03 once again made a huge jump, and the brief weightlessness almost threw the two of them to the wall on the other side of the cockpit. At the critical moment, Daozi relied on his excellent physical fitness to stabilize the center of gravity and firmly grasped Satoyu, forcibly keeping him in place at the cost of almost dislocating his arm. Warning: the synchronization rate has dropped to 56%. This value is far below the minimum standard for the Iron Pilot to drive the Mecha. According to the normal process, Beiying should have lost most of the control of the Mecha long ago. But she was still kneeling there with a pale face, and the pain in her expression seemed to be heavier than before. Damn, she's dying. After realizing the seriousness of the problem, Satoyu didn't care about the pain in his arm anymore, and let Daozi drag him behind Shiro in the shaking cockpit. He could conclude that the connection between Shiro and Manuscript 03 could no longer be measured simply by the synchronization rate. This kind of pain that was almost empathetic to the Mecha was far from something that humans could endure. Just when Daozi thought that Satoyu was going to forcibly cut off Shiro's neural synchronization device, Satoyu took out a nerve sedative injection from his combat uniform. Take your Mecha back. After saying that, Satoyu stabbed Shiro's neck. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 143, Removal of Restraints. Neurosedative injection, a drug developed by Omega in the early days to stabilize the consciousness of the pilot, has an immediate effect and can even restore consciousness to a pilot who is in a serious rabbit chasing state within a second. However, the injection was launched urgently in the absence of clinical trial samples. At that time, the Watchers had less than 5 mechas. In order to ensure that the pilots would not experience neurosynchronous instability during combat, this emergency drug was specially approved by the Alliance for use by the pilots of various legions. Later, the injection was proved to have extremely strong side effects by the bloody lessons of the pilots. After use, symptoms including but not limited to the following will appear: neurasthenia, inhibition of emotional neurons, split personality, and severe suicidal tendencies. If a person can wake up from a trance and remain calm in an instant, then the neurosedative injection will inevitably demand compensation from the user at the cost of depriving humanity. This is what the Watchers said when they announced to the various legions that the injection was banned. But what many people don't know is that even though the neurosedative injection can cause such serious side effects, the Alliance also sees a glimmer of hope in this unfinished experiment, the hope that ordinary people can also become pilots. This is an opportunity that cannot be missed for the united regime composed of Zori, Daokun and Yijin. After several rounds of confidential meetings, the Alliance secretly approved Omega's continued research and development of the neurosedative injection, and classified this series of projects as absolutely confidential. Those who know the information must not reveal the relevant information to anyone on any occasion. Satoyu is one of the few insiders. This is because he was treated as a successor to the United Front Corps, and he volunteered to participate in the clinical trial. To this day, the neurosedative injection, which has been improved more than a dozen times, still causes users to have side effects such as irritability, auditory and visual hallucinations, but these side effects will only gradually appear after multiple cumulative injections. There is no antidote for all this. In order to eliminate the side effects of the neurosedative injection, other drugs must be used to treat the symptoms, but such mental illnesses are difficult to cure even after the technological revolution. Beiying is lucky. Satoyu injected her with the latest neurosedative injection. Just one injection will not have a profound impact on the life of this young girl in her later years. Shiro. As Satoyu's last call echoed in her ears, all the sounds around Shiro disappeared like a speaker that was suddenly turned off. Along with all the sounds, the cockpit where Shiro was located also disappeared. She once again returned to that familiar yet strange place. the bright incandescent light, the strong isolation tank, and the transparent liquid that was enough to suffocate Manuscript 03. No, not Manuscript 03, but Bean. The next second, the figures who were pointing at the isolation tank suddenly disappeared, and the copper wall made of cold alloy became rusty. The light that was enough to make people dizzy began to flicker, and only the isolation tank filled with liquid seemed to remain unchanged. Dead silence, the same dead silence. Even though Shiro had her own body this time, every step she took on the floor made no sound, as if she was a ghost from some distant time and space. Somewhere in the dark, Beiyang seemed to feel someone calling her, but the sound was very weak, as if it was just a meaningless shout, not calling Beiyang's name. However, Beiyang knew that the voice was calling her. So Beiyang walked to the center of the room without hesitation, because every step she took, the voice calling her would get closer. Finally, Beiyang came to the isolation tank filled with liquid. Zizzy. Just as Beiyang tried to see the figure floating in the tank, a strange electric current sound suddenly sounded in the silent room. The whole room was like a movie scene played by an old TV, and the flower screen caused by the poor signal kept tearing the originally peaceful picture. After several flashes, the whole room was already shrouded in dark red lights, very much like the cockpit with alarms in reality. At the same time, everything also had sound. Beans. Beiyang widened her eyes and slapped the isolation tank covered with dirt almost frantically. In the tank, a girl who looked exactly like Beans was curled up in the blood red liquid. She was naked and shivering. Blood red plaques covered her body from top to bottom. Only her poor neck and head were spared. Beans. In the real world, Satoru was struggling to break free from the flesh and blood that bound his body, and beside him, the disgusting flesh and blood was about to crawl into Bean's mouth. The entire cockpit had been completely eroded by the flesh and blood, and the rapidly climbing blood red color had even pinched Manuscript 03's neck. Stop. After enduring the weak period, Yuzao finally recovered his normal strength. He nimbly crossed a series of obstacles and swung the chainsword at the Manuscript 03 that had just taken off. The silver chainsword entangled the right foot of Manuscript 03 like a snake whip. Under crossing Shine's full drag, the blood-red Mecha suddenly fell from midair into a pool of blood, splashing a burst of red water. Bang! After Beiyang's repeated impacts, the cracked isolation tank finally exploded completely. The sharp glass as big as a palm cut Beiyang's skin along with the blood-red liquid, but Beiyang didn't care. She just instinctively stretched out her hands and caught Daozi, who was collapsed in her arms. At this moment, the naked Daozi turned back into the fair-skinned girl. A satisfied smile appeared on her face, and she hugged Beiyang's neck with her tender hands. Even though Daozi in her arms couldn't speak, Beiyang felt the girl's warm body temperature. Neural synchronization has been detected. Current synchronization rate 100%. Release of restraint unit. In Yuzao's sight, the fallen Manuscript 03 suddenly burst out with an unprecedented energy, and this unstable energy almost melted the chainsword made of giant metal. In order to preserve his half-damaged equipment, Yuzao was forced to retract his chainsword. 100% synchronization rate. How is it possible? Satoru's pupils reflected a number that he had never heard of in his life. At this time, he could clearly feel that the flesh and blood that bound his body were rapidly losing their vitality, and he and Daozi were saved. The white shadow kneeling on the control seat slowly stood up, and her combat uniform gradually changed from white to scarlet red as she stood up. The restraint unit has been released, and the second mode has been activated. In Xingqian's identifier, Manuscript 03's name changed on the spot, and Yuzao couldn't help but read out the other party's new code name. Butterfly. Chapter 144. The Flying Red Butterfly. The dead flesh and blood all turned into brown mud and evaporated rapidly in the spacious cockpit with the red phantom light. The energy overflowing from the body condensed into red starlight floating in the air. They regarded the wall as nothing, penetrated through the hard wall made of various alloys, and painted the entire cockpit into a burning red star map. At this moment, Dai had stood up from the ground, and the white armor covering the surface of this giant had been fully unfolded into a shape that Yuzao had never seen before. The current outline of this mecha is the most beautiful and tight curve that Yuzao has seen since he opened his eyes in this world. Countless clean and neat lines intersect with each other, together forming a mecha that maximizes aerodynamics. Compared with the common first mode manuscript 03 before, Dai's armor structure has once again taken a new step towards the concept of agility. It sacrifices thickness and impact resistance to make the armor covering the surface of the body into a thinner form. It seems that these armors are no longer defensive equipment used to resist high-intensity physical impact, but are like skin that fits closely with the body itself. In the places where a small amount of armor was not covered, the body emitting red light was exposed without any cover. In Yuzaro's opinion, it didn't look like a steel skeleton at all, but a real energy body. 6 needle-like silver metal bodies were pulled out from the butterfly's body, evenly arranged on the left and right sides behind the mecha, floating in the air in an unknown way, like torture instruments hanging on the back of the mecha, and like arrows waiting to be fired. Baying, can you hear me? Baying. Sato Zion looked at the white-haired girl in front of him who was a whole head shorter than him, and his heart was full of shock. There is no doubt that the mecha must be related to Baying for it to become what it is now. But Sato Zion himself couldn't tell whether the current mecha was still under Baying's control, because his scanner could no longer tell whether the mecha was an enemy or a friend. The light spot symbolizing the butterfly kept switching between green and red, which directly led Sato Zion to doubt whether there was something wrong with his energy detection module. Baying did not answer Sato Zion. She was like a monk wandering in her own spiritual ocean, staring motionlessly at the seemingly calm blood lake on the holographic display. Wake up. Just as Sato Zion wanted to reach out and pat Baying's shoulder, an invisible force stuck his strong arm in midair. After seeing Sato Zion's strange behavior, Daozi also tried to grab Baying's arm, but the force also isolated Daozi. Unknown energy activity detected. Suddenly, both Sato Zion and Daozi were lifted up by this force and forcibly sent back to the fixator. Click. With 2 metal rotation sounds in Sato Zion's ears, he and Daozi were firmly put on the fixator, and even the safety buckle was pulled to the tightest. Baying, just say a word if you need help. Sato Zion knew that all this was done consciously by Baying, but the other party had not spoken, which made him very worried about Baying's current state. The next second Sato's words were drowned out by a thunderous noise. Boom. A huge hand as high as 100 meters suddenly rushed out of the blood lake under the feet of the 2 mechas, trying to imprison Crossing Shine and Dai in its palm. Yuziro, who had a premonition of uneasiness, directly hooked the rock pillar in the distance with his chain sword and pulled himself over, while Dai, driven by Baying, suddenly jumped high and avoided the opponent's terrifying grasp at a height that even his palm could not reach. Damn, the lake is not that deep. Where did this hand come from? Sato had given up thinking about what had happened to the mecha he was riding. At the moment, he just wanted to focus on this newly appeared enemy. What's more, he and Daozi had never seen a monster that only grew into the shape of a human arm. Blood water. Finally, everyone heard Baying's voice again. It was a voice mixed with mechanical texture, as if it had been mixed and processed by some device. Whether it's Heioji, Xingshan, or Manuscript 03, they are all just the incarnation of blood. It can transform into anything through some unknown principle. In a cockpit that looked like a red galaxy, Baying slowly turned her face and glanced at Sato Zion and Daozi who were sitting on the fixator with her eyes from the abyss. You mean, wait, why haven't we landed yet? Just as Sato Zion was about to continue what Baying said, he found something wrong. Dai did not follow the laws of physics and fall after reaching the highest point, but floated directly in the air. Yuziro couldn't explain this question either. Standing on the ground, he could only see that the dozen or so full-joint jet nozzles on Dai were in operation, as if they were spraying out some invisible substances. It seems that Manuscript 03's sudden transformation into a butterfly was originally designed into the mecha. This equipment can be used normally even after the mecha transforms. Yuziro sighed silently in his heart and thought of Dr. Yuan Zen's face. What on earth is Omega developing? It's going to attack. As soon as Baying finished speaking, the giant fist raised in the air suddenly relaxed, revealing its palm that was previously filled with blood. It was a huge brown mouth that could swallow the mecha. Puff. In an instant, with the giant mouth as the dividing line, the big hand suddenly shattered into countless strips of meat curled together. The whole scene was as bloody as if someone put this arm into a spiral meat grinder. As the splashing blood plasma fell to the ground like a torrential rain, countless strips of meat immediately attacked the butterfly suspended in the air from all directions. Don't leave the holder. With Beiying's calm reminder, the butterfly floating in the air suddenly began to accelerate, dancing in the air with an extremely exaggerated sharp angle trajectory, constantly avoiding the meat strips that wanted to touch the body. At the same time, the two high-frequency hot swords in Beiying's hands were also covered with a layer of neon-like warm light. She quickly shuttled through the net of flesh and blood, while waving her swords to tear the meat strips that passed by her into even finer fragments. Blood beads and minced meat bloomed in the air like fireworks in this grand performance, accompanied by the red meteor dragging a tail, and staged an elegant and violent scene in this abandoned underground facility. Yuzio, who was standing on the ground, was also not idle. He had recovered 90% of his strength, and had already added his blood to the energy used to make the plasma axe blade. In this way, every axe strike of Xingqian would also carry a toxicity that was enough to evaporate the blood. How to kill a monster without a shape. Chapter 145. Escaping gravity. Damn it. I should have known I shouldn't have eaten the rations this morning. When Satoru gritted his teeth and said this, he and Ozzy were still being swung around in the fixture. Every pilot who can drive a mecha on the battlefield is an elite selected from thousands of people, and overcoming dizziness is also a test that every pilot must pass during training. But the situation Satoru is facing now is much more exaggerated than the training he received back then. Even if the cockpit of this mecha is an advanced adaptive spherical rotating cabin that can automatically adjust the angle to remain relatively still, when the mecha makes large movements, it cannot completely keep up with the pace of Butterfly in reality. Because Butterfly's movement speed has exceeded the adjustment speed of the cockpit, every change in the cockpit's angle can only be regarded as tracking a movement on the body, which directly caused Satoru in the cockpit to remain in the double dizziness of screen tearing. Now even if someone told Satoru to tie him to a high-speed hamster wheel, he would be willing. In just 1 minute, Sato felt that his internal organs may have been separated from his body, floating outside the orbit of a distant planet, and drifting along the gravity that came out of nowhere. Out of the dignity of a pilot, Sato could only close his eyes to endure the extreme discomfort of his body and mind. Doing so would at least prevent his vision from being stimulated. Otherwise Sato would be conquered by the nausea that was pressed under his throat even faster. Daozi, who was sitting next to Sato, was also uncomfortable. This could be seen from her twisted facial features, but Daozi's body's ability to adapt was obviously much stronger than that of ordinary people. After all, she dared to open her eyes. The huge feeling of dizziness and vomiting only stayed in Daozi's brain for no more than 10 seconds, and she basically adapted to the irregular movement trajectory of the body. However, her vision and brain still had a hard time keeping up with the amplitude of Butterfly's movements. The huge amount of information on the battlefield that was changing rapidly filled Daozi's head like a flood that had been opened, making her overwhelmed. In the entire cockpit, only Beiying stood at the control position without changing her expression. The expression on her face was hard to describe in words. She looked like an intelligent machine that had just acquired a human body. Her coldness revealed subtle emotions that were noticeable. Beiying, what happened to you and your mecha? The familiar voice of Crossing Cheyenne finally rang in Beiying's ears. Although he saw that Beiying's mecha had completed an exponential leap in combat power, Yuzio knew very well that Omega always had risks and benefits in doing things, otherwise this mecha would not be just a test model. Being able to obtain such a level of power in a short period of time, I'm afraid that the price behind it will also make people stay away. Me and my mecha. Beiying's eyelids twitched slightly, and the words that were about to come out of her mouth suddenly got stuck in a strange place. But this did not affect Ai's gorgeous rotation in the air, cutting off dozens of meat strips that wanted to entangle her. Can you still hear me? Yuzio raised the volume while cutting through the thorns with a giant axe. Yes. Even though Beiying only answered with one word, Yuzio could hear the tone that was not firm at all. Do you have a way to reduce the synchronization rate? Your current state sounds very wrong. Although Yuzaro didn't know the situation on Beiyang's side, he was at least 70% sure that the current situation was related to the 100% synchronization rate. However, just as Yuzaro's words came out, the space where the two mechas were located began to vibrate violently. Unknown energy activity detected. Puff. 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 The flesh and blood wrapped around the man-made buildings and natural rocks began to swell one after another, and then exploded into balls of blood, filling the entire space with scarlet blood mist. The disgusting flesh and blood returned to the blood water in an almost suicidal way, leaving only the man-made buildings that were destroyed and damaged due to parasitism, and the weathered rock walls that were almost assimilated into dark red. In less than half a minute, the blood water in the entire space was almost submerged by Crossing Shine's legs. Warning, the body is under unknown attack. Unlike before, Yuzaro could clearly feel that his body was being dragged wildly in the blood. These things that looked like liquid seemed to become extremely sticky, as if they would completely solidify in the next moment. If it weren't for Yuzaro's blood being toxic to the blood, he would have been eaten to the point where not even a metal skeleton would be left. But when the blood had increased to this level, Yuzaro could no longer rely on bleeding to solve this crisis. Even if he was drained into a dry corpse, his blood could not neutralize so much blood. Snap. The silver metal chainsword sprang out from Crossing Shine's right arm and tightly wrapped around a building support column that looked a little shaky. The next second, Yuzaro used the power of the chainsword's contraction to force himself out of the blood pool and jump to a cube platform that was about to be submerged. If this goes on, I will be buried alive in the blood pool sooner or later. Looking at the rising water level under his feet, Yuzaro hurriedly looked for the next transfer location. But after looking around, he found that there were only a few buildings that could still cross the water level, and many of them looked like they could not bear the weight of the Mecha. Even the last few platforms that met the requirements were quite far away from Yuzaro. Even if he ran at full speed on flat ground, it would take Yuzaro at least 10 seconds to reach his destination. Not to mention that he had to wade through the blood that was not above his waist to transfer there. Just when Yuzaro was in a dilemma, the butterfly that was still flying in the air suddenly broke out of the encirclement of the meat strips and rushed towards the platform where Crossing Shine was trapped. This is it. When the butterfly passed over Crossing Shine's head, Yuzaro even thought that the other party was going to reach out and lift him up from the platform. Although in terms of weight, the butterfly could never lift a giant like Crossing Shine. But considering that the butterfly could even fly, Yuzaro couldn't help but reach out his hand. However, Yuzaro's outstretched hand still fell into the air somewhat awkwardly. As it turned out, he was only half right. Dai did not reach out to pull Crossing Shine up from the platform. After all, the Mecha's hands were still holding two high-frequency swords used to kill monsters. But in Yuzaro's special perception as a living being, he already felt that he was wrapped up by a special energy emanating from Dai's body and was tightly bound to Dai. Just like that, Crossing Shine left the ground in the real world without any warning and floated beside this elegant Mecha like a butterfly. Chapter 146 Energy Origin. It is indeed some invisible energy. Yuzaro carefully felt the energy that enveloped his body and tried to deeply engrave this energy into his senses. A few seconds later, when Yuzaro opened his eyes again, he could already see a hazy red mass surrounding him. There is no doubt that this hazy red is the energy released by Butterfly's body, but what makes Yuzaro feel strange is that the armor covering the surface of Butterfly's body not only does not play a role in clearing, but looks more like blocking the flow of energy. This directly leads to Butterfly only being able to maintain limited energy release through a dozen full joint jets on the body, and in Yuzaro's eyes, this is tantamount to limiting Butterfly's combat effectiveness. On the other hand, although Yuzaro can already use his senses to intuitively see the appearance of this energy in the air, he still cannot determine the nature, properties, and operating principle of this energy. From the current performance, these energies do not seem to be scattered disorderly, but are intentionally controlled by Butterfly, forming a spherical energy field that spreads outward with Butterfly as the center. In this energy field, the Butterfly seemed to be able to change gravity, so that a giant like the Mecha could leave its feet off the ground and float, and move freely in the air in a way that seemed extremely unreasonable. However, this free flight was limited to the butterfly itself, that created the energy field. Objects like Yuzao who were wrapped in the field could not be free at all. He was more like a floating mecha brought by the butterfly, and could only move in a space that did not exceed the range of the energy field. Through visual observation, Yuzao roughly determined the diameter of the energy field. 200 meters. This range is really limited. Although 200 meters is a very large range, no matter how you look at it, considering the huge size of Crossing Shine and the butterfly, Yuzao's range of activities has basically been locked around the butterfly. More importantly, the energy in this energy field is not evenly distributed. For example, the energy density surrounding Crossing Shine and the butterfly is very high. Compared with the lowest energy density in the field, the difference between the two can even reach an order of magnitude of 100 times. Is it because the energy released is too small, so it can't achieve the effect of uniform coverage? Yuzao felt a little regretful, because it meant that he couldn't even change his position next to Dai. After all, except for Beiying himself, no one knew whether Crossing Shine's unauthorized movement from the high density area to the low density area would cause him to fall from the air. My power is limited, and I can't let you move freely. Beiying confirmed Yuzao's guess. As soon as he spoke, I will calculate the path that the two of us can pass in advance, but I can't help you in the battle with Zushujian. When Beiying spoke, Dai had already taken Crossing Shine to make a sharp turn in the air, avoiding the meat strips that wanted to attack them from the front and back. I can fight by myself, you just need to pull me to fly. Yuzao understood what Beiying meant. The other party regarded Crossing Shine as an open-air machine gunner sitting on the roof of the car, and I was the driver. That's good. Beiying's answer sounded quite mechanical. Yuzao was just about to ask Beiying about his current mental state, and I had already pulled him into the giant net woven by the meat strips again. Two scorching meteors, one red and one black, shuttled back and forth between the frantically dancing meat strips. Every time the two mechas changed their trajectories, they cut the meat strips into countless pieces of varying sizes like a sickle rolling through weeds. At this moment, Yuzao finally understood Dao's difficulties. Although he did not feel dizzy or vomit, the scenes full of combat information did make Yuzao feel the feeling of brain overload again. Almost all of his energy was used to think about how to protect himself from harm, while destroying as many enemies as possible in front of him. Swish. As the two mechas once again drew a waning moon in the sky, only the last quarter of the meat strips that had originally covered the sky were left. Killing them like this is not a solution. They will keep coming back one after another. Yuzao, who finally caught a gap in the battle, quickly expressed his thoughts. My blood is not enough to evaporate so much blood. They won't grow back. What? After hearing Beiying's somewhat unexpected answer, Yuzao noticed that the meat strips scattered all over the sky not only did not regenerate wildly, but also did not dissolve after falling into the blood. Yuzao could understand that the meat strips that he cut off would have this situation. After all, he had already merged his blood into the plasma axe blade, but he didn't expect the effect to be so good that even the corpses of the meat strips would not be accepted by the blood. But even the meat strips cut off by Dai had the same effect, which made Yuzao a little puzzled. According to normal logic, the first thing Yuzao thought of was the energy emitted by Dai. Perhaps this energy also had the same effect as his blood. But this was probably just Yuzao's wishful thinking. Otherwise Dai would not have to swing her sword to fight these disgusting things personally. She only needed to control the energy density in some areas of the energy field to kill those meat strips that wanted to attack her out of thin air. I have a way to effectively kill these creatures, and the same applies to blood, but I need your help. Beiying rarely grabbed Crossing Shine and continued to dive down to kill him. Perhaps in her eyes, these non-regenerative meat strips no longer posed a threat. What method? Unlike you, the energy I release is not lethal to the creatures made of blood, but I can devour their energy and make them inactive. Devour their energy. After hearing what Beiying said, Yuzao couldn't help but focus on the energy radar. The light spots representing the butterflies continued to switch between green and red, but Yuzao did not feel the unique hostility from the monsters. This reminded Yuzao of the manuscript 07BV driven by Taishao. I have never heard of any mecha that can devour the energy of monsters. Not to mention, whether you can use the energy of monsters for your own use, the act of devouring alone is enough to change the current situation of the war. Just as Yuzao was thinking, Sato Zion, who had finally recovered, also joined the conversation. Sato Zion was not joking, and every word he said came from the heart. Once humans master the technology to devour the energy of monsters, it means that people can finally use advanced high-energy weapons to deal with these monsters without having to worry about the unstable energy and the monster's blood becoming a catalyst in the reaction. If what Beiyang said is true, perhaps even without relying on the power of pilots and mechas, humans can expel the alien species of monsters from the planet, thus ending this decades-long war. Chapter 147 Final Plan. Omega is stealing power from monsters that humans should not touch. When Satoru firmly believed that the butterfly mecha had the possibility of ending the human war, Yuzao's mind popped up the words that Tai Xiao had said. The flashing light dots on the radar display were red and green, like a sleepwalker standing on the edge of a cliff and staring into the abyss. Yuzao felt that he was very close to the truth, as if he could open the locked treasure chest of Omega as long as he stretched out his hand. Beiyang, lower the synchronization rate. Yuzao once again put forward the request he had made before. I have the same opinion as Crossing Cheyenne. Satoru also expressed his thoughts without hesitation. In the cockpit of Butterfly, Beiyang, wearing a scholared combat uniform, did not move his lips from beginning to end, as if Beiyang had been standing here since the production of this mecha, like a fixed facility embedded in the operating position. Now we still need this power. After the battle is over, I will naturally lower the synchronization rate. Beiyang's words pierced the hearts of the other three people like a steel nail, because this was a fact that no one could ignore. But apart from Beiyang himself, perhaps only Yuzao himself knows where the power used by Butterfly really comes from. In Yuzao's opinion, the reason why Butterfly can devour the energy from the monster is because this mecha has the ability to carry this unstable energy. However, this also leads to another unavoidable problem. As a container, if Butterfly only absorbs this energy into the body, what is the upper limit of its carrying capacity? Yuzao stared at the energy field that was getting darker and darker in his vision, and a terrifying answer had already been outlined in his mind. Butterfly is not only absorbing energy from the monster, but also using this energy. When he thought that the energy field that was now wrapped around himself might be the same source as the monster, Yuzao couldn't help but focus his eyes on Butterfly beside him. What is hidden under these silver armors? When Yuzao silently said this in his heart, he seemed to have glimpsed Omega's crazy idea. I have a plan. Without waiting for Sato Zion and Yuzao to continue speaking, Beiyang took the lead in grabbing the right to speak. Tell me about it. Sato Zion also tactfully skipped the previous topic. I can feel that these bloods are not what they seem on the surface. They are not independent individuals, nor are they immortal. Just like the battles that Crossing Cheyenne and I experienced before, these bloods are just unconscious shells. As long as the conscious entities that control these bloods can be destroyed, they will naturally melt away. It seems that you have found where their bodies are? Satoru understood what Beiyang wanted to express as soon as he heard it. To capture the thief, capture the king. As long as the brain mentioned by Beiyang is destroyed, all problems will be solved. It's right there. While answering, Beiyang controlled Dai to raise his right hand and pointed the high-frequency hot sword in the direction where Manuscript 03 ran when it was controlled by the monster. That was one of the few places in the entire D4 area that was not illuminated by the light, but from the surface, it was just a calm blood lake with no buildings around. Don't tell me there is a spring-like thing hidden there. Satoru saw the abnormality of the direction pointed by Beiyang at a glance. There was nothing there, and he couldn't guess anything else except this option. Yes, all the blood was born from there, and the source of their consciousness must be there too. How do you know this information? Yuzao interrupted their conversation, his tone full of doubt. Because even as a new type of life form, he couldn't discover this information in the first time. Only after Beiyang pointed out that direction, Yuzao could use the short respite time now to carefully feel it. Consistent with what Beiyang said, there is indeed a weak hostility there. Their energy contains this information. Obviously, the they that Beiying was talking about was the blood under everyone's feet. So you can also read information by consuming the energy of monsters. Sato Xiang felt that his jaw was about to drop to the ground. For a moment, he even doubted whether he was talking to a talking monster. After all, in Sato Xiang's opinion, the difficulty of this matter was almost equivalent to directly opening someone's skull through surgery, then using a finger to dip the other person's brain into his mouth to taste it, and thus knowing the person's thoughts. They have a different way of communicating from humans. Beiying's tone sounded quite calm. Okay, let's not dwell on these issues for the time being. So your plan is that we pour as much firepower as possible there? Sato Xiang had already given up thinking. No, missiles or high-frequency hot swords can't cause effective damage to blood, and wrapping the energy I release on these equipment won't work either. The efficiency is too low. Does it mean that, if the blood doesn't take shape, you can't attack them? Yuziro quickly figured this out. Yes, that's why I said I need your help. Tell me, how can I help you? Yuziro's tone also sounded a little cold, because he felt that the person talking to him might not really be Beiying. I will try to use my energy to drive away all the blood and water in the spring, so that the core body hidden under the blood and water will be exposed. Beiying didn't mind crossing Shine's tone. I can't move during this process, and the blood and water will definitely launch a counterattack. I need you to block these attacks for me until we find the body of the blood and water. It's really a role reversal, but I can't fly freely, which may be difficult. Beiying's proposal reminded Yuziro of the scene when Beiying was fighting Hero alone while he was repairing himself. I will expand the energy field to the entire area. You don't have to worry about that. Won't this be a burden for you? Yuziro vaguely realized that doing so would bring a huge burden to Beiying, especially since he didn't know whether Beiying's condition was good or bad. For Beiying, what price would it cost to become Dai from Manuscript 03? No, as long as you can protect me. But Beiying's answer was decisive and straightforward. I hope so. Yuziro knew that he would only waste time if he continued to struggle. Only by ending this battle quickly would he and Sato Xiang have a chance to get things clear. After hearing Yuziro's answer, Dai once again pulled Crossing Shine into the last cluster of meat strips and completely wiped out these disgusting creatures from this world. Are you ready? Beiying asked as he sent the two mechas to the top of the spring. Of course. Yuziro clenched the giant axe in his hand. Then let's get started. Chapter 148 External Equipment. The 6 spikes surrounding the butterfly's back broke away from the mecha they had been following, flew to the bottom of Crossing Shine and Beiying, and floated directly above the designated target. Click. Under Beiying's control, the 6 spikes stood up in midair one by one, forming a rotating dynamic spiral with a slightly tilted posture. Unknown energy fluctuations detected. As the system prompt rang in Yuziro's ears, the butterfly floating beside him instantly burst into a burst of red light. The silver-white armor showed visible erosion under the flowing red phantom light, and the hazy red energy field in Yuziro's sight became clearer and clearer. At the same time, the 6 spikes floating above the spring also began to transform, stretching from a length of about 5 meters to 12 meters. White rings appeared around the 6 spikes like angels' crowns. These rings seemed to be composed of some mysterious symbols with symbolic meanings, and they kept rolling around the spikes. Flying is not difficult for you, right? Just as Yuziro was looking at everything in front of him in surprise, Beiying suddenly asked this question. What? Before Yuziro could react, he heard a maddening tinnitus and scream. The sound waves that could penetrate the human eardrum came from the 6 spikes under the feet of the two mechas. The red color of the setting sun completely enveloped the entire D4 area like a blood mist, and the energy density wrapped around Crossing Shine's body also rose to a whole new level. Boom. The next second, the calm blood lake suddenly exploded, as if it had been bombed by a nuclear bomb. It was also at this moment that a huge wave of tens of meters high began to spread outward from the spring eye as the center, as if a tsunami that destroyed everything in the D4 area was violently swallowing up everything. In Yuziro's sight, Dai's body was continuously releasing violent unknown energy. In fact, even Yuzao himself was not sure whether Dai's current behavior could be described as released, because the armor covering the surface of Dai's body had been covered with a layer of red light that looked like rust. Dai's energy output efficiency was even more than 10 times that of before. The Mecha marked as red in the energy radar was stretching out its right hand, aiming its palm at the surging spring below, as if the 6 spikes were her sights. In the cockpit, Sato and Aozi were so nervous that they couldn't even speak, because the whole space was shrouded in a dreamy neon, and the source of all this strangeness seemed to be the white shadow standing in the control position. Unconsciously, Sato seemed to feel that his body seemed to become a little light. As a result, he turned his eyes and found that Daozi, who was sitting next to him, had even left the seat. If it weren't for the fasteners and safety belts that stuck Daozi in place, this petite girl would have floated to the other side of the cockpit. Gravity. Outside the cockpit, Yuzao finally confirmed the ability of the butterfly. No matter how this energy was operating, the external result it showed was the change in gravity. He only now realized why Beiyang asked him if flying was a difficult thing. Crossing Cheyenne had always been dragged by Dai before, but now when it was Yuzao's turn to control his own body to fly, he really found it difficult to adapt. After all, Crossing Cheyenne did not have the maneuvering device on Dai, and could not control the movement of the body by changing the angle and direction of the full joint jet port. At this moment, the X-shaped wing armor behind Dai suddenly fell off her body, flew all the way to Crossing Cheyenne's back, and finally stopped in front of the spine without a mounting port. Does it mean that I have to use it to achieve free flight? Yuzao hesitated for a moment, but still chose to change the shape of the black armor covering the surface of his body, and create a device mounting port that fits the X-shaped wing armor. This is one of the benefits of being a living being able to adjust your body structure as needed. Snap. As the sound of the metal buckle closing rang out, a new external device appeared on Yuzao's body interface. Then, Yuzao closed his eyes, trying to feel the specific use of this equipment, and how it was related to this mysterious energy. Dual-purpose device. In manuscript 03 form, it has both missile launcher and power assist functions. In butterfly form, it has an additional energy guide function, and a brake module is added. Yuzao quickly mastered the detailed information of this equipment module from inside to outside. If it is placed on a butterfly, it may not be used for braking at all. It can only play the role of assisting in adjusting the flight balance, but if it is placed on me, it is equivalent to growing an extra pair of wings. Yuzao shook his head slightly in the consciousness space. He estimated that the people of Omega would not have thought that the braking flight function they carefully designed for the butterfly would eventually become a decoration for the butterfly, and instead made a wedding dress for Crossing Cheyenne. When Yuzao opened his eyes again, he was able to freely control the high-density energy surrounding Crossing Cheyenne with the help of the X-wing armor. Their resistance is more intense than expected. I need more time. Almost at the moment, when Crossing Cheyenne installed the new equipment, Beiyang also told this not so optimistic news. The 6 mutually rotating spikes were like a spiral drill head floating in the air. Directly below the spikes, a huge vortex with a diameter of more than 80 meters was rotating synchronously with the spikes. The surging blood was forcibly squeezed out of the periphery of this nearly vacuum vortex. No matter how they impacted the edge of the vortex, they could only be isolated from the bursting waves. In the center of the vortex, a huge blood-colored crystal substance was blocking the cylindrical channel used as a spring eye, stubbornly resisting the continuous attack from the butterfly. Cracks grew silently on the surface of the crystal, as if countless invisible cutting knives were constantly scratching the surface of the crystal. Those crystal fragments that unfortunately fell off would suddenly rise vertically upwards and gradually turn into blood in this weird process, and finally be completely eliminated in the powerful gravitational vortex, becoming waste that sank to the bottom of the blood-colored tide outside the vortex. How long do you need me to help you hold on? Yuzao didn't expect that there would be a day when he would say this to Beiyang. Sharp hostility rose from Yuzao's feet like a tide, and he knew that this was a precursor to the blood attack. 5 minutes. Unexpectedly, Beiyang's answer was exactly the same as the time Yuzao had needed before. Can you hold on? Of course. Facing Beiyang's almost declarative tone, Yuzao gave a firm answer while controlling the silver metal chain sword to wrap around the black axe handle. Come on. Chapter 149 Black Barrier. The blood red crystals were disintegrating bit by bit. The surging waves were still beating the edge of the vortex, but no matter how fierce the blood was, they could not cross the invisible barrier. So they decided to change their thinking. If they couldn't solve the problem, they would solve the person who raised the problem. Crash. In an instant, countless small mechas made of flesh and blood suddenly emerged from the blood red ocean. G2 power armor? Sato, you recognized these things that were transformed from blood at a glance. However, compared with its original body, these replicas did not seem to be very sophisticated. Not only did they not have rifles in their hands, but they could not even copy the missile launchers and heavy sniper rifles on their shoulders. It seemed that except for the jet backpacks, these replicas were just bare-handed whiteboards. Scan completed. The number of hostile targets has been determined to be 572. Looking at the densely packed small power armors on the water, Yuzaro, who was in the consciousness space, frowned all of a sudden. He began to envy Beiying, who only had to face the hero at that time. As a giant life form with a height of nearly 100 meters, Yuzaro would rather deal with those big guys with similar physiques to himself, or even taller than him. But Yuzaro was unwilling to deal with those things that were only about the size of his fist. Compared to smashing them with fists and feet, or splitting them with plasma axe blades, guerrilla artillery groups and guard machine guns might be a more efficient choice. But Yuzaro simply did not have so much ammunition to deal with such a large number of enemies. Did you realize that it is more efficient to deal with mechas in this way? Yuzaro clenched the giant axe in his hand, and the Chenglan guerrilla artillery group under his abdominal armor had already revealed the dark barrel. Boom, boom, boom. The next second, these power armors ejected from the water like bullets. Thick blood mixed with dark yellow substances gushed out of the jetpacks of these power armors, giving them the ability to soar into the sky. This exaggerated bouncing force that is almost like a rocket launch is something that the original G2 power armor cannot achieve at all. Yuzaro also used all his firepower. 4 groups of guerrilla artillery and 2 guard machine guns on the shoulders were all firing crazily at this moment regardless of the cost. He had given up thinking about the impact of running out of ammunition on the subsequent battle. However, the attack of the blood water was more fierce than Yuzaro imagined. Even if the guerrilla artillery and machine guns on his body could use up all the spare ammunition within a minute, he could not stop all the enemies who could pounce on his face in just 2 seconds. Boom. Countless green flames exploded on Crossing Shine's body, but there were more suicide attack power armor passing him and heading straight for Die floating in the air. It was not until then that everyone realized that the power armor was just a shell. These 5 meter tall creatures were actually bombs made by blood water, hardened. Just when hundreds of power armor were about to hit Die's body, a dark shell suddenly wrapped up Die. Instantly, countless green flames rose up on the surface of the sphere. The blood mist that lingered for a long time even prevented Yuzaro from confirming Die's condition in the first place. It was not until all the power armor disappeared from the energy radar that the black sphere shell wrapped around Die disappeared in the air, revealing Die's intact body. However, Crossing Shine, who was floating beside Die, had dozens of cuts on his body left by the violent explosion. After losing the artificial external armor, Crossing Shine, who only had black armor as a defensive equipment, could no longer completely block this level of attack. The explosion using monster blood as energy is much more terrifying than conventional firepower. It really works. Yuzaro, who was in the consciousness space, gritted his teeth and quickly repaired his own injuries while he breathed a sigh of relief. In the attack just now, Yuzaro realized that he could not block the attacks from all directions by himself, especially small creatures like this. Even if Yuzaro used his body to block it, the effect was extremely limited, considering that the X-shaped wing armor gave him the power to directly control the energy field and also provided him with the opportunity to indirectly contact the energy. A bold idea popped into Yuzaro's mind. He could use the X-shaped wing armor's ability to guide energy to release the hardening skill to an energy field with sufficient density. The energy surrounding Die and Crossing Shine happened to be the area with the highest density in the entire energy field, which just met the conditions for the hardening skill. to attach to physical matter, so Yuzao successfully created a spherical defensive shell around Dai's body. However, this new move still couldn't escape the limitations of the hardening skill itself. Creating a shell that could wrap Dai was equivalent to giving Crossing Shine himself a full body hardening. Not only was the skill short in duration, but the cooldown time was also frighteningly long. More importantly, Yuzao couldn't use this move for offense now. Although the energy field was large enough to cover the entire D4 area, the energy area that could meet the density conditions only existed around Crossing Shine and Dai. Be careful, the second wave of attack is coming. As soon as Beiying finished speaking, the blood water under the feet of the two mechas suddenly dropped by nearly half. Unknown energy fluctuations detected. Unknown energy fluctuations detected. Unknown energy fluctuations detected. This time, 3 mechas stood up from the blood water, sandwiching Crossing Shine and Dai in the middle in a triangular position. This is really a huge investment. Even Satoyu, who was sitting in the cockpit of Dai, couldn't help but show his worry. In front of everyone were the hero, Crossing Shine and Manuscript 03, who were newly transformed by flesh and blood. Yuzao himself also felt the same pressure, although he was somewhat fortunate that the other party changed its tactics and did not send a new round of suicide attacks. The difficulty of facing 3 Mecha replicas at the same time was also hell level. Can you hold it off? As if he had noticed Yuzao's difficult situation, Beiying, who had maintained the same posture for more than a minute, asked with concern. If I say I can't stop it, will you give me any tips? Yuzao, floating beside the butterfly, couldn't help but glance back and forth between the 3 replicas. If the 3 replicas really pounced on him together, Yuzao really couldn't think of any good way to block the attacks from 3 directions at the same time. It will take another 30 seconds of cooling time to activate the hardening again, but the bodies of the 3 replicas are almost grown. I can't help you. Beiying's answer completely made Yuzao give up the idea of relying on external forces. Then I can only rely on myself. Chapter 150, Preemptive Strike. 3 against 1. How do you want to deal with it? Satoyu, who was sitting in the cockpit of the butterfly, couldn't help but glance at the G2 power armor standing on the floor. Although he knew that Crossing Shine's strength was far superior to ordinary mechas, the enemies they faced this time were also not easy to deal with. Satoyu didn't know what Crossing Shine and Beiying had encountered outside during the time they were apart, but from their previous conversation and the appearance of the 2 mechas, when they just fell into the D4 area, the 2 of them were probably in a state of constant battle with monsters. Moreover, there was not even a complete piece of artificial armor left on Crossing Shine's body. Based on this alone, Satoyu could guess what kind of enemies the 2 had defeated were. That's why he was worried about Crossing Shine's current situation. Even in the 2-on-2 battle just now, Crossing Shine and Beiying did not show much advantage in their respective battles. The whole battle could only be described as evenly matched. If they hadn't adopted the temporary position changing tactics, they would probably be dead now. Adapt to circumstances. Yuzao's answer was somewhat unexpected by Satoyu, but it was indeed the only thought in Yuzao's mind now. 1 against 3, and each opponent's strength is similar to his. This is not a disadvantage that can be compensated by tactics. Yuzao is a new life form, but not a prophet. He doesn't know how these 3 replicas will attack once they move. Will they choose to kill him as the guardian first, or go straight to the butterfly that poses the greatest threat to the Spring Eye? 2 fists are no match for 4 hands. If Yuzao fights 3 enemies at the same time, unless he uses Harden, he will suffer more damage no matter what. He also knows that the best way is to defeat them one by one, but how easy is it to achieve this tactical goal when he is fighting alone? Crossing Shine's advantage in strength will only be infinitely reduced by the opponent's advantage in numbers at this moment. On the contrary, Crossing Shine's lack of agility and speed can come in handy at this time. Agility and speed. Yuzao, who realized the key factors to turning the tide of the battle, silently repeated these 2 words in his heart. Using the venue is even more empty talk. Half of the entire D4 area is covered in blood. Crossing Shine and the butterfly even have a problem landing. What's the use of terrain? The more he analyzed, the more Yuzao found that his situation was disadvantageous in every aspect. Under any conditions he could think of, the other party could end the battle cleanly and neatly in just 10 seconds. That's why he said adapt to circumstances, because in his opinion, any plan on paper would be pale and powerless in the next battle. In Yuzao's eyes, there was only one way to win this battle. That doesn't sound like a sure answer. Sato Xiang also understood the meaning behind Yuzao's words, but even so, he couldn't give any better suggestions. However, Yuzao didn't respond to Sato Xiang's words. Swish. Yuzao, who was guarding Dai in the last second, has now turned into an arrow from a string, leaning over and rushing towards Crossing Shan, who has not yet fully transformed. Yuzao actually chose to take the initiative. And at the moment, when his body moved, the other two replicas that had not yet fully transformed also rushed straight towards Crossing Shan. Sure enough, just as Yuzao thought, the monster didn't know that the Harden skill had a cooldown time. After the first suicide attack of hundreds of power armors ended in failure, the consciousness controlling the blood water naturally classified the hardened shell as a normal skill. But the blood water also noticed that Crossing Shan, who was floating next to the butterfly body, could be seriously injured. If the blood water inherited the previous combat experience on the surface, it would be easy to judge that Crossing Shan also knew the skill Harden. So there are two situations in front of it. The first one is that Crossing Shan and Manuscript 03, which has transformed into a butterfly, both have the ability to use a Harden skill, but for some reason, Crossing Shan did not activate it when he was attacked by the power armor. But this is also easy to explain. That is, Crossing Shan felt that it was unnecessary to activate the Harden skill for this level of attack. After all, he also has the ability to self-repair. The second is that only Crossing Shan has the ability to use a Hardened skill. The hardened shell wrapped around the butterfly body was made by Crossing Shan, and Harden can only act on one mecha at the same time, which also explains why Crossing Shan did not activate this skill when he was attacked. Considering both situations, no matter which one is true, Zushu should attack Crossing Shan first, because it cannot be sure whether Butterfly will also harden, but Crossing Shan will definitely. Since Crossing Shan cannot use Harden when Butterfly is attacked, then the best solution is to eliminate Crossing Shan and then verify whether Butterfly will use Harden. When constructing this conjecture, Yuzao has completely put the other party into the human perspective. Moreover, judging from the other party's learning speed and actual combat performance, Yuzao also believes that the other party definitely has the ability to analyze the battle situation. But sometimes thinking too much is not a good thing. Just like now, due to the lack of intelligence, Zushu has to assume that Butterfly will have a hardened shell that resists everything when it is threatened. In order to make the most efficient use of time, Zushu gave up the idea of using the same moves to attack again, and instead focused on Crossing Shan, who was injured in the attack. It was precisely because of this that Yuzao dared to take the initiative to attack boldly, because the blood water would only list the butterfly as a secondary target in a short period of time, and only Crossing Shan had the highest priority. With the idea of verifying his guess, Yuzao only used half of his maximum speed in this dive, so that even if his hypothesis was not true, he would have the opportunity to temporarily turn around when he was halfway through the sprint and go back to protect the butterfly that was attacked. The good news is that Yuzao's guess was right. At least the reaction of the replica was exactly the same as he expected. After the guess was verified, Yuzao, who was still flying, suddenly began to accelerate and swung the giant axe to the position where Crossing Shan was standing before Hero and Manuscript 03. Boom. With a loud earth-shaking sound in the air, a huge circular wave as high as 100 meters was set off at the place where Crossing Shan had originally stood. Before the waves fell, a Crossing Shan with only half an arm left flew out of the thick water wall, sliding back and forth on the water. The replica's movements are faster than before. Did it evolve in the previous battle? Yuzao sighed at the opponent's reaction speed while pulling the giant axe out of the wet rock layer. Swish. The next second, the giant axe wrapped with a silver metal chainsword flew straight towards the retreating Crossing Shan. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.